everyone. Welcome to the 10th annual Green Builder Media Sustainability Symposium. Hey, we've gotten into double digits now. This year's theme is Systems Reckoning. Now, that may sound a little foreboding, but this year's symposium is designed to be a cultural intervention, challenging outdated assumptions and introducing new ways of measuring, valuing, perceiving, and financing the world around us. As I mentioned, this is a milestone year, so we've got a star-studded lineup for you over the next 2 days with nearly a dozen speakers that might make you feel slightly uncomfortable, but are undeniably relevant. Of course, this event would be nothing without you, so on behalf of everyone at Green Builder Media, thank you for joining us. We also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. The first is Trane Technologies. Now, they've been supporting the symposium since the beginning, and that speaks to their place as a world leader in creating comfortable, sustainable, and efficient environments. With a bold set of 2030 sustainability commitments, Trane Technologies is challenging the status quo and taking decisive action now to create a sustainable future where communities thrive, where equality is foundational, and where the environment is protected for future generations. James Hardy is the North American leader in fiber cement exterior design solutions. Hardy products offer personalized design options with trusted protection, low maintenance, and long-lasting beauty. James Hardy offers siding and accessories for every home style. We also have TimberTech on board. See what I did there? Speaking of boards, TimberTech's decking products look more like real wood than any other composite, resists scratches and stains, and is easy to maintain. And because they don't need to thoughtlessly cut down trees to make it, their decking keeps the planet beautiful too. We also have a couple new sponsors. We welcome Provia to the symposium. They offer durable, energy-efficient home exterior products, including entry, storm, and patio doors, manufactured stone, and metal roofing in a multitude of styles, finishes, and custom sizes. And finally, we have my friends over at the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, or as they are commonly known, IAPMO. They are a global team of experts with deep expertise in codes and standards, which is applied to their rigorous product testing, certification and inspection services, professional development offerings, industry research, and their policy and advocacy work. Now, our opening remarks are titled The Affordability Reckoning, Reframing the Solution. And it will be presented by the woman who always bats lead off at the symposium. She is the CEO of Green Builder Media, Sara Gutterman.
Mike, thank you so much for always being such a fantastic moderator. Thank you also to Mary Kessner, our production manager, who is the wizard behind the curtain, making it all happen. And to reiterate, Mike, what you said, we could not do this or really any of our work without the support of leading companies like Trane Technologies, James Hardy, TimberTech, Provia, and IAPMO. Thank you so much to them, not just for powering today's symposium, but for your leadership in sustainability. So while Green Builder Media is in our 21st year, as Mike indicated, this is our 10th anniversary of the Sustainability Symposium. And since I'm feeling fairly celebratory, I want to start with a little story as we are also about to celebrate our great nation's 250th birthday. So let me use that as a milestone and a timeline, and let's go back in time for a moment and consider how people lived 250 years ago. Working class families generally rose before dawn and worked until dark. They hauled their own water, they cut their own wood, they preserved what they grew because a bad winter was a real threat, not just an inconvenience. A toothache could be fatal. A third of their children might not reach adulthood. Their entire existence was organized around a single relentless question: would there be enough to get through the day? By almost every measure we know how to count, we are extraordinarily better off today. We live decades longer. We fly through the skies. We hold the sum of human knowledge behind a pane of glass in our pockets. We walk into hospitals that would look like miracles to that family 250 years ago, and into grocery stores with more SKUs than our brains can actually process. By the metrics of the spreadsheet, the line goes up and to the right, and it has never stopped climbing. And yet, we're drinking water laced with PFAS, forever chemicals that we cannot fully filter out. We're breathing air that, on a bad day, shortens our lives. The fish we feed our children carries microplastics that we did not consent to eat and cannot see. Rates of anxiety, chronic disease, and loneliness are climbing in the wealthiest society in human history. So I want to ask the honest question underneath all the others, the one that the chart up and to the right can't answer. Are we really better off? I ask that not to be morose, but because I think we've been telling ourselves a story, a very persuasive story that's now quickly unraveling. And the story goes like this. The version of capitalism that we've built here in the US has been the most prosperous, productive, and innovative engine in human history. And in many ways, that is absolutely true. Hundreds of millions of people have moved out of poverty. Technology has made the impossible routine. But the story goes on to say that if we just keep pulling the levers, lower costs, faster cycles, leaner inventories, sharper optimization, that the prosperity will keep compounding. And that's where the flip side of the story is exposed. And that's really what I want to talk about today. For decades, we've been running an off balance sheet liability of staggering proportions, which has been disguised as productivity, efficiency, and growth. The disguise has been so convincing that even the people running the system haven't always recognized what's happening. We've not only been producing wealth, we've also been producing IOUs, quiet ones, distant ones, written in places that we don't usually look, in the atmosphere, in the aquifers, in the public health data, in the brittleness of supply chains, in the actuarial tables that insurers are now quietly refusing to sign. And those IOUs are starting to come due. The bill is here, and that is the reckoning. Reckoning is a hard word. It's the language of accounts being settled, of what I like to call honest accounting, a process of adding up what we owe and what we have, an honest, transparent process. It's not usually how business talks. In business, we prefer softer language, transition, transformation, disruption, which, let's be honest, those are the words that we use for change we want to brand as exciting. Reckoning says the bill is here. The question I want us to sit with today is not whether the bill is real. It's what we do now that it has arrived. That's what systems reckoning is about. Not Earth Day sentimentality, not corporate sustainability theater. The much harder, much more interesting question of how we reorganize an economy that was designed to defer its consequences indefinitely and is suddenly, all at once, being asked to settle. I've called my talk today the affordability reckoning, but I want to acknowledge something immediately. Affordability is not the disease. Affordability is the fever. The disease is something stranger and deeper, a systemic confusion about the word value and what that actually means, who pays for it, and over what time horizon. And until we treat the disease, the fever will keep rising. Let me relay a frame that I think is more useful than the way we usually talk about sustainability. The modern economy is, at its core, a cost relocation machine. Most of what we celebrate as lower cost is not actually lower cost at all. It's cost that has been moved across space, moved across time, moved from the balance sheet of a company onto the balance sheet of a household or a municipality or a watershed or the next generation. When a manufacturer reduces unit costs by relocating production to a region with weaker labor protections and weaker environmental rules, it has not actually eliminated cost. It has relocated that cost onto workers and ecosystems somewhere else. When a builder hits a price point by skimping on performance, health, and resilience, that cost isn't eliminated either. It's relocated onto the homeowner who pays it in utility bills, maintenance, and insurance premiums for the next 30 years. When a utility postpones grid hardening, when a city defers stormwater investment, when a healthcare system optimizes for throughput and minimizes prevention, the cost doesn't disappear. It's moved into the future and it accrues interest. Compounding is wonderful when it's in your retirement account. It's much less wonderful when it's in the form of externalities. I've been saying a lot lately that cheap upfront typically means expensive forever. That's the architecture that we've built. And most of us, whether we have admitted it to ourselves or not, are living inside the forever part of that sentence right now. What I'm describing, it's not a moral failure, it's a design feature. The accounting standards, the quarterly cadence, the property law, the appraisal methodologies, the tax code, they weren't built to capture costs that travel through time and space. Anything outside that frame becomes effectively someone else's problem. And here's the part that I find genuinely interesting and also genuinely hopeful. We already have the intellectual scaffolding to fix this. We've had it for years. Economic theory is very often the front runner of market activity. Business decisions and public policy are typically laggards. The ideas arrive first, and then it takes time, sometimes decades, for markets and governments to catch up to what theory already told us. Let's consider for a moment William Nordhaus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in Economics in 2018 for his work on the economics of climate change. Decades ago, Nordhaus formalized something that now sounds obvious, but was radical then in its vigor and rigor. That greenhouse gas emissions are a global externality, a cost whose effects spill outside the market and are not captured in market prices. He built integrated models that put an actual number on that missing cost, the so-called, quote, social cost of carbon, so it could finally be entered into the ledger as the liability that it actually is. Economists understood half a century ago that we were systematically mispricing reality, that we were leaving out entire categories of cost off the books. What lagged was everything else. Businesses kept optimizing for visible cost, policy kept deferring, the market kept producing IOUs in the name of efficiency. The gap between what we knew and what we did is the gap that we are now being tasked to close by our economic, climate, and social realities, all at once with interest. We've built an enormous and an incredible economy on a very narrow definition of value. But what we're quickly discovering is what's outside the frame. So, what is outside the frame? The climate, for one, public health, for another, social cohesion, particularly visible and acute in a world of divisive politics, workforce capacity, ecosystem services, water tables, soil, trust. The conditions, in other words, that any economy needs in order to function at all. You can't run an economy without those things any more than you can run a body without a circulatory system. So, this period of reckoning that we're entering into is not primarily about ethics or politics or morality. It's about arithmetic. The numbers that we used to be able to ignore are showing up on today's financials. Insurance companies see this first because that's their job. They're the canary in the coal mine. When insurers stop writing policies, they are not making a political statement. They're telling us that their models can no longer price the risk that has been created, that the system has exceeded the boundary of what their math can actually hold. Nearly 30 US states have seen at least one major insurer pull back in the last 3 years. Entire counties have become completely uninsurable, except through state-backed last resort pools. That's not a climate statement. That's a valuation statement. It's the market saying, we used to be able to price this. We can't anymore. Please fix it. The grid is another example. Our grid, built mostly between, let's say, 1950 and 1980, was designed for a different climate, a different demand curve, a different topology of risk. It was optimized for centralized generation, predictable load, and weather that stayed within historical envelopes. Today, demand is exploding. AI data centers alone are projected to consume roughly twice the electricity of the entire residential housing sector by 2030. Electrification is accelerating. Climate volatility is making both supply and demand erratic. And we're trying to deliver 21st century reliability on 20th century infrastructure. The result is showing up in bills. Wholesale electricity prices in some US markets have doubled in the last 3 years. Residential rates are climbing at multiples of inflation. Utilities are warning of brownouts in regions that have never seen them before. The capital required to modernize our energy infrastructure today is now in the trillions. Climate scientists are telling us the same thing in a different language. They're not saying that the world will necessarily implode if we cross a 2 degrees Celsius warming threshold. They're telling us that their models stop working past that threshold and that we'll be flying blind into a far more unpredictable future. And here's the rub. As Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same mentality that created it. And the market cannot solve on its own a problem the market itself created by mispricing reality. Right now, the market, the voice of the buyer, consumers, are pleading with us to put back what's missing: the conditions of livability, the fundamentals of resilience, the things we've externalized for over a century and called it efficiency. Nowhere is the great mispricing more concrete or more personal than in our most sacred spaces, our homes. For decades, the housing industry has anchored itself to a single metric above all others: price per square foot. It's tidy, it's quantifiable, it fits neatly into spreadsheets and pro formas, but it tells us almost nothing about what actually matters to the people who live inside those homes. Price per square foot ignores carrying costs. It ignores durability and resilience, comfort, health, carbon, insurance, volatility, utility load, and climate exposure. It ignores the full cost of ownership, and it reduces something deeply human into something dangerously incomplete. And that metric wasn't even designed for the homeowner. Price per square foot is an artifact of financialization, a metric built in response to shareholder demand, a crude measure that actually strips housing of its social, environmental, and economic substance. With that in mind, there are a few housing sector observations that I want to share in the face of the current affordability crisis. First, value is not priced into homes, but it needs to be. Our housing stock is wildly heterogeneous, ranging from barely code compliant boxes to net zero, resilient, high performance homes. Treating them as equivalent because they happen to share square footage makes no economic sense. A home with a HERS score of 58, today's national average, spends roughly $1,630 a year on energy, which is nearly $800 less than an older code-built home. That difference is real money every month for the entire life of the mortgage. Yet that cost savings is invisible in the appraisal, in the mortgage, and in the listing today. Next, buyers across every generation are already looking past first cost to the full cost and full value of homeownership. This is not an aspirational statement. It is a data-informed one. 10 years of Green Builder Media's Cognition Smart data shows that only 14% of home buyers today say that they prioritize lowest upfront cost, whereas over half relay that minimizing long-term cost is their top priority when making home-related decisions. 63% want a total cost breakdown on listings. The demand for honest accounting is coming directly from the buyer across all generations. There is a shared desire for clarity about what a home actually costs to own, not just what it costs up front. The next observation is the one that should really reorganize how every builder, lender, and appraiser thinks about the next decade. This transition is already underway, and it's going to rock the fundamentals of housing. We've given a name to the metric that captures what price per square foot leaves out. It's called value per square foot. It accounts for energy performance, energy independence, resilience, health, durability, water, carbon, community, and the long-term equity that a home actually builds. And buyers are reaching for it before we've even finished defining it. 83% of our consumer audience tells us that they would use a value per square foot rating to compare homes. 53% say that they always factor long-term cost into home-related decisions. And even though value per square foot is a brand new and barely marketed concept, 27% of our consumer audience already name it as the most useful metric for comparing homes, running just behind total monthly cost and full ownership cost, and far ahead of price per square foot. So let's sit with that for a moment. A metric that most of the industry has never even heard of is already outperforming that the metric the entire industry has been built on. That's what a revaluation looks like in early innings. Solving the affordability crisis can't fall on builders alone. That is precisely the dynamic that has too often sacrificed performance, health, and resilience in the name of cost cutting. It will take appraisers trained to see what makes high performance valuable, lenders who underwrite operating costs, not just acquisition cost, insurers who reward durability with lower premiums, realtors who market long-term value over short-term price, utilities and municipalities offering incentives durable enough to survive political cycles. When each of those players reinforces the same signal, the market will finally recognize the fundamental components of value. And that's when we will truly be able to find a way out of the affordability crisis, which really is a valuation problem. So that's the diagnosis. Let me turn now to something I find much more interesting, which is the response, because there is one. Beneath the headlines, almost invisibly, an entirely new economics is forming. It's not the green economy. It's not the circular economy. Those framings, as well-intentioned as they are, still sit inside the older logic. They treat sustainability as a category, a bolt-on, a vertical. What's actually happening is more fundamental than that. We are watching the slow repricing of reality. We're watching markets begin to see things that used to be invisible. Now, there's three signals that stand out to me that show this change. The first signal is in capital allocation, the smart money, and I mean institutional, fiduciary, pension-sized fund money. It's quietly moving towards what I call durability assets, infrastructure with long, useful lives, renewable energy, real assets with embedded resilience, companies whose competitive moat is operational integrity rather than financial engineering. The capital is reckoning that what survives is more valuable than what ebbs and flows or spikes. Investors are learning, the way that they always eventually do, that a durable asset is worth more than a fragile one priced as though it will last forever. The second signal is corporate dynamics. For a long time, sustainability lived in the parts of organizations that handled philanthropy, a department adjacent to the business, funded when margins were good and cut when they weren't. But that's changing because business leaders are recognizing that sustainability reduces risk. Leading companies are no longer treating resilience, efficiency, and stewardship as causes they want to support. They're treating them as operational discipline to protect their balance sheets from a future that they see coming. Lower energy intensity is a hedge against volatile power prices. A resilient supply chain is a hedge against the next shock. A healthy workforce is a hedge against the cost of crisis. This is, in the truest sense, the actualization of honest accounting. The third signal brings us back to consumers. It's the shifting consumer mindset. Greenbuilder Media's Cognition Smart data shows that buyers, especially younger ones, are no longer asking only what something costs. They're asking different questions. They're asking what things cost over the life of owning it, over time. They're asking what it costs other people and the planet. They're asking what it costs their future. They're effectively widening the time horizon of consumer judgment. And that alone is going to reprice trillions of dollars of assets. No doubt, the reckoning is underway. The assets that have been deferred, ignored, and externalized are being repriced upwards, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally. Resilience used to be a cost line item. It's becoming a premium. Health used to be a personal responsibility. It's becoming a competitive advantage. Trust used to be a soft asset. It's becoming the only moat that lasts. Stewardship used to be philanthropy. It's becoming operating discipline. The market is starting to do what the market is supposed to do, discover prices. And the prices it is discovering today are different from the prices that our economy has been operating on. So the question for every leader, builder, developer, investor, appraiser, insurer, policymaker is no longer whether this revaluation is happening. It is happening. The question is whether you actively participate in it or if you let it wash you away with the tide. The companies and communities that win the next 10 to 20 years are not necessarily the ones with the biggest margins today. Think Darwinian survival of the fittest. They are the ones whose products and services hold up best under honest accounting. They are the ones that will be willing to count what is real, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. The companies that get there first will look for a moment like they're overpaying, like they're paying more for materials, investing more in prevention, building more redundancy into their models, training their workforces deeper. On a 1-year horizon, it might look like they have higher costs than their competitors. But 3 or 5 years in, things flip dramatically. Those companies' warranties claims are lower. Their employee retention is higher. Their insurance is cheaper. Their customer loyalty compounds. Their balance sheet does not carry the hidden landmines that their competitors are about to step on. So here's where I want to land. We're not waiting for some future moment of choice. We are inside the choice right now, this decade, this year, this moment. The decisions that we make today will determine which version of the future that gets built. And of course, there are 2 versions on offer. The first version is the one that we get if we keep deferring, if we keep optimizing for the visible cost and ignoring the invisible one. If we keep building homes, infrastructure, supply chains, businesses, healthcare and childcare systems, and policies that work beautifully until they don't. That version is not stable. It's the version that produces the insurance pullouts and the grid failures and the supply shocks and the political instability and the affordability crisis that we are watching unfold in real time. It's not sustainable, not because of some abstract ethical principle, but because it is mathematically incapable of carrying its weight much longer. The second version is the one that we actually have to build, and that is much, much harder. It requires us to count what we have been ignoring. And I want to be specific about that because I think we've all heard a lot of vague calls to action over the years. And honestly, I'm tired of vague. If you are a builder or a developer, the real work is to stop competing on a metric that's actually killing your margins and start competing on what your buyers actually want. Home buyers are not buying square feet. They haven't been buying square feet for years, really, ever since millennials entered the housing market at scale and aligned their spending with their values. Your buyers are looking for a lived experience with a longer lifespan, enhanced comfort, predictability, and peace of mind. Sell them that, and you're no longer in a race to the bottom. If you're an investor, a lender, an insurer, or an appraiser, the work is to update your models before reality updates them for you. Because reality is updating them with or without your permission. Better to know the risk up front than to discover it post transaction. If you're in policy, utility regulation, municipal finance, the work is to align incentives so that the long term and the short term stop pointing in opposite directions. And if you're a leader of any kind in this room, and everyone in this room or on this Zoom is a leader of something, the work is to widen the time horizon. Most of the failures of the last 50 or 100 or 250 years have not been failures of intelligence or imagination or creativity. We have that in abundance, and it's wonderful. They've been failures of horizon. We've optimized aggressively. We've just optimized for too short of a window. The fix is not to stop optimizing. Let's continue to do that. The fix is to optimize for longer. So let me close with this. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who survived more than most of us will ever be asked to survive, wrote something that always stops me in my tracks. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. I would put the same challenge to our institutions, our metrics, our markets. When the situation can no longer be changed by tweaking at the margins, and the situation we are in cannot, then the work shifts inward. We change what we count. We change what we reward. We change what we value and what we are willing to see. Reckoning is recognition. It is the moment a system becomes honest with itself about what it actually owes, what it actually has, and what it actually is. Reckonings can be uncomfortable, but reckonings are what allow systems to evolve into something better and more meaningful. The systems we have inherited are not eternal. They were built by people. They can be rebuilt by people. The metrics that govern those systems are not laws of physics. They are conventions, and conventions can be changed. We are sitting on a generational opportunity, and I want you to feel that for a minute, not as marketing language, but as fact. The energy transition, the housing transition, the financial system's slow embrace of real risk, the rise of consumers who think in life cycles, the wave of capital looking for durable assets. These are not separate stories. They are the same story. They are a civilization waking up to a new reality. And the companies, the professionals, the communities that lead this reckoning will define the next economic era. And it's not because they're necessarily the most virtuous, but it's because they're the most accurate. So when you're done listening to the systems reckoning sessions over the next 2 days, I'd like you to carry one question with you, which sits underneath every conversation we're about to have. What are we still pretending not to know? Because once we answer that question honestly, the work, the real work, can begin. Thank you, and welcome to Systems Reckoning.
Appreciate it. Our next speaker is known the world over for his passionate campaigns on behalf of climate and racial justice. He's a contributing writer to The New Yorker and a founder of 350.org and Third Act. He's won the Right Livelihood Prize, the Gandhi Peace Award, and honorary degrees from 19 colleges and universities. He's written more than 20 books about the environment, and his latest book is Here Comes the Sun. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Bill McKibben.
First of all, this is such a privilege to get to talk to this particular audience who are out doing the stuff that needs doing. And, the point is, of all my work over the last few years, is that we're at a point where we finally have the set of tools that we would need if we were really serious about moving fast. I wrote the first book about what we now call the climate crisis, what we then called the greenhouse effect, back in 1989. And back then, we basically understood this story. We understood the science of climate and what was going to happen. And sadly, all the things that we predicted back in the 1980s have now happened and are happening faster and more dramatically than we thought they would. And boy, is the pace of that going to pick up even from its current dismal state in the next 6 months, because this El Nino that's about to break over our heads looks like it's going to push temperatures way past what we've ever seen before, with all of the attendant chaos and bedlam, and with now the real deep problem that we're beginning to see sort of structural changes to the planet. The way that the jet stream and the Gulf Stream work in particular are now moving very much into the center of these questions. So very scary. But the thing that's changed now and this will be obvious to everyone on this call, is that for the first 35 years of this climate fight, we were working in a world where fossil energy was relatively cheap and clean energy was relatively expensive. And about 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where that flipped. Now we live in a world where the cheapest energy is also the cleanest energy from the sun and the wind. It is important to be saying to ourselves over and over, we live on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. The reason that it's so important to keep saying that to ourselves, and especially to everybody else, is because we spent so long calling this stuff alternative energy that it kind of marginalized it in people's minds. And we've got to get past that. And we can, as is evidenced by what's happening now in vast parts of the planet. Obviously, this story is centered in China, and obviously the Chinese have become extraordinary at their ability to build out these energy resources, to develop them, to make them ever cheaper, to iterate at an astonishing level. But of course, that's spread to lots of other places too, some of them closer to home. California, which did a lot of this work, though it's done many things wrong with distributed energy in the last couple of years, California has built enough renewable resource and put in enough batteries that as of a few days ago, California's use of natural gas to produce electricity is down 60% from what it was 3 years ago. That's a big number. That's the kind of number that begins to change, if we can move it fast around the world, that begins to change how hot the planet gets. Not stop global warming, it is too late for that, but start to shave tenths of a degree off the eventual maximum temperature. And remember, at this point, each tenth of a degree Celsius that we raise the Earth's temperature moves 100 million human beings from a safe climate zone into a more perilous one. So this is just ungodly important work that y'all are engaged in. California is not alone on this. I saw the numbers yesterday for Australia. They've now got enough solar and wind and batteries up that they're using 25% less natural gas to produce electricity than they were 1 year ago. So the numbers are really starting in those places to seem pretty incredible. In fact, Australia's got so much now that, as many of you know, beginning on the 1st of July, so less than a month from now, they'll begin offering 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon to all Australians. That's a inflection point in human history. This stuff, energy that we've spent 700,000 years paying dearly for, whether it's the hours spent gathering firewood or the hours spent working to pay the electric bill, no longer needs to be that kind of burden for human beings. The sun, which already gives us for free light and warmth and via photosynthesis our supper, is increasingly willing to provide very low-cost power, whether we catch it in photovoltaic panels or take advantage of the fact that it creates the breezes that turn those majestic turbines. Now, this good news, obviously, is bad news to people who own oil wells and coal mines, and it will come as no surprise to anyone that they have mobilized to defend their business model, even at the cost of wrecking the planet. We've watched this play out in American politics, where we've now, thanks to the oil industry's support of Republicans in the last election cycle, managed to gut the IRA, try to shut down wind farms off the coast, put all federal lands off limits to solar power, on and on and on. In order to stand up to that and let this revolution proceed here in this country as well as elsewhere, we've got lots of work to do, most of it political or political adjacent. And by that I mean, among other things, we have to let people understand what's happening and what the possibilities are. We did the first iteration of this thing that we called Sun Day last September on the autumnal equinox, and we had about 500 events across the country to celebrate this rise of clean energy. And in the wake of that, we've managed to do great legislative work over the last 6 months, the result of which is that we're going to have we already have 8, and I think before the spring is out, we'll have 10 or 11 states that have allowed the use of balcony or plug-in solar. Obviously not going to save the world, but the most granular use of this clean energy technology, and one that serves as a very potent gateway drug and develops an important market. We're also doing all the work we can, and in many places starting to succeed on easing solar permitting requirements, on and on and on. Well, at the moment, we can't do much in Washington, something that many of us are trying to change. At Third Act, we're hard at work on the midterm elections, but we can, even right now, get a lot done at the state and local level. And we can also get more done at the global level. We're going to have another of these Sun Day events globally next June 20th, the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, and it will be across the planet, and it will be a day when we try to really raise the salience of this inflection point in human history. So we're deep in this fight. In my most recent book, Here Comes the Sun, I really, I think, laid out as best I can how amazing this progress has been over the last 36, maybe now 48 months. An energy transition at a speed we've never seen before. But we're so far behind the 8 ball with climate change that we need to figure out how to make it go much faster, especially here. I will say that over the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we've seen the politics of all this shift once more with America's extremely ill-advised war in the Middle East. Lots and lots more eyes have been opened up to the need for and possibility of this clean energy revolution. I have said, and now I see a lot of other people saying, which I'm very happy, that though sunlight travels 93 million miles to reach the Earth, none of those miles go through the Strait of Hormuz. And that's become a powerful and important point for us to be hammering home. So, look, I find this a desperate moment and an exciting moment at the same time. And I don't know how it's all going to come out, and I'm deeply committed to making it come out as well as it can, understanding that that is, above all, at this point, a political task.
Bill, thank you so much, as always, for your incredible insights. I'm going to launch into some of the questions that I have for you. And let's just start with, for decades, you and many other climate activists and we at Green Builder Media have argued that renewable energy adoption and decarbonization is necessary, but increasingly we're also seeing that it's cheaper, more resilient, and more geopolitically secure, as you alluded to. Why do you think that argument isn't winning more? Why is it not more effective, and what do we have to do to be more successful as we try to make that argument?
Well, let's recognize in the first place that it's winning in 170 countries or so around the world. And the stories just keep emerging day after day after day. What's happening in Africa, what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in India, what's happening in Cuba, which is currently putting up solar panels faster than any place on Earth, not fast enough, I fear, to outrace the Trump administration's efforts to strangle the country, but as fast as they possibly can. It's not working here because the fossil fuel industry has gamed our political system and corrupted it, and therefore managed to shut down as best they can this transition. I mean, they've taken away the IRA money for the transition. They've literally spent billions of dollars of federal money buying back the wind leases from companies that had sent that money to the federal government for the right to harvest that offshore wind. They've put federal land off limits to solar panels, on and on and on. I think really the extraordinary thing is that even in the face of this, a considerable amount of this work continues to be done in this country. The great majority of new electric generation that'll go in this year will be sun, wind, and it should be much higher, and we shouldn't be succumbing to the gas industry's use of data centers as the next Ukraine invasion, the next justification for building lots of dirty energy. But those are the things that are happening right now. There's just no getting around it. It's not driven by any change in the American political attitude towards clean energy. Polling shows that Americans are just as intent on clean energy and just as scared about climate change as they were 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. But for the moment, we've allowed the small clique of fossil fuel interests to purchase the power in our political system. And so we have no choice but to fight back.
So, Bill, that leads me.
I will add.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
I'll just add. I think this is a wake-up call moment for the clean energy and green building and whatever industry. It tried for many years to placate the fossil fuel industry and the Republican political machine that it had built, tried to placate them by not standing in opposition, by being politically neutral, by on and on and on, and got spit on in return. Time for people to stand up and actually engage. And I'm glad to see at least a little bit of that happening. The Solar Energy Industries Association becoming a little more engaged. Was glad to see that one of the California billionaires, Chris Larson, used a lot of money to defeat a Texas congressional candidate in the primary last week over these issues. hopefully that is a pattern we'll see repeated more, and it will start to send some messages to politicians. But, right now, it's a bit of a rout, and it's saddest to watch that rout in places like New York State, where the governor is just surrendering and without paying much of a political price.
So, Bill, that leads me to an obvious question, which is how can we right the ship, so to speak, here in the US? What needs to happen? What do we need to do?
Well, as I say, we need to engage politically. When I say we at the moment, for me, I'm talking about Third Act, this group that we started 4 years ago now for organizing old people like me, people over the age of 60. So tell your parents and grandparents about us. We now have 120,000 volunteers, and we've emerged as one of the fulcrum points, say, for this plug-in solar battle over the last 6 months. But there are other people doing some of the same kind of work too. But we need that kind of real engagement with the process, legislative process, at the state and local level, but also the political process. We now have a PAC, gray PAC, to try and support candidates who are going to do the right thing. We've got, we're endorsing candidates. We're moving as hard as we can. These battles are everywhere. This played out over the last couple of weeks in the California gubernatorial battle. I don't think they've finished counting votes there, so it's not clear whether Tom Steyer's effort to make clean energy a huge part of that debate will continue on into the runoff this summer or not. But those are the kind of places where we have to be deeply engaged. And I was actually quite pleased to see groups like the Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity, on and on, get very engaged in that fight on his behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback here. So we've seen in this country interest, for example, in electric vehicles ebb and flow as the cost of gas rises and falls. And we're kind of seeing the messaging, and I absolutely love your quote about sunlight not having to travel through the Strait of Hormuz. I think that gives us all something really interesting to ponder. But we're seeing renewed interest in the transition to renewables, EVs, et cetera, because of the impacts of the war with Iran. What do you think that the long-term impacts are going to be? Will they be sticky? Is that, will this really spur a real transition, or will the interest ebb and flow as the war itself kind of ebbs and flows?
I think, again, in the rest of the world, it's pretty clear that this is a tipping point. I just saw the numbers for Australia this morning, where EVs, despite all the other work they're doing, EVs have been kind of lagging. They comprised 50% of new car sales last month. That means that they've crossed some line. And it'll continue, because once they're in widespread use, everybody quickly figures out that they're way better cars than internal combustion engines, and they quickly demand the infrastructure to support them, and on and on and on. So I think that we've probably, in a lot of the world, broken through permanently around electric mobility, EVs, e-buses, e-bikes, on and on. In this country, again, it's, we're engaged in a all-out effort to prevent this stuff. That's what it meant to elect Donald Trump this time around. So the Postal Service, I don't know whether this has actually happened yet or not, but the Postal Service has apparently been instructed to rip up the EV chargers that had been installed at their facilities to service electric mail trucks, on and on and on. So we're up against a tremendous headwind here. And again, the only way to beat it is politically. That's where the problem comes from. You know, that's why we have this steady drumbeat of opposition and of disinformation and silliness all the time about this stuff. I don't think Detroit is fundamentally opposed to this transition. In fact, I think they understand that they have to make it or they're not going to be an international presence. And it's interesting to watch Ford scrambling to build a cheap electric within the next year or so. You've been reading good stories about some of that. But Detroit's been, again, a weak read and stood by as the president gutted emissions requirements and so on and so forth.
Thanks, Bill. Let's talk about policy. Are there any policy measures that are underway that give you some hope?
Well, there's no policy measure at the federal level right now. There's ongoing debate about permitting reform and things, which is necessary and a good idea, but how do you carry it out at the moment? I don't think anybody has any idea because the White House doesn't respect any agreements about anything. You know, they've just now, it turns out, decided to use completely ridiculous and inapplicable Defense Department regulations to shut down work on every wind farm in the country. You know, how do you negotiate for permitting reform in that kind of environment? You can get something that looks good on paper, and then the White House will just come up with some other insane reason to block what you're trying to do. There is, as I say, policy work going on at the state level. A lot of it's, you know, in places like New York, we're going in reverse because the governors have gotten scared, sometimes because they can't build wind farms and things because of the Trump administration, but have gotten scared and are reverting to slowing down energy goals, reducing them, so on and so forth. We're doing what we can. At the moment, the policy stuff that's exciting for us to be working on is this solar permitting reform, which basically amounts to figuring out how to do the same kind of instant permitting that's the norm in Australia or Europe. And one of the reasons that those countries move at, you know, it costs 3 times less than it does here. And this rapid adoption of laws permitting plug-in solar, which is really the brightest spot at the moment in the policy environment. That said, the technical shifts are coming so fast that they're beginning to outstrip even the kind of policy understanding here. If the last 2 or 3 years have been about solar panels and wind turbines, it's pretty clear now that the next 2 or 3 years are going to focus on batteries. At every dimension, big batteries for big grid interventions, medium-sized batteries that are rewriting how we understand how we island energy and electricity and so forth, and small batteries for distributed energy resource, virtual power plant development that are really fundamentally changing how people conceive of their own relation to the larger energy system. And I'll note that, as soon as batteries get some kind of policy green light, the adoption rates are ferocious. The Australians are now installing 100,000 home batteries a month, in a population base that's not very large. And it's just completely changing the dynamics of the system. So even in the absence of American policy intervention, technology continues to really drive what's possible. The way to understand what the Trump administration and the oil industry, by extension, are doing is just blocking what would otherwise be the natural flow of change here. It's truly incredible what they're doing, I got to say. And one way to understand it, and as an American patriot, this makes me angry, is as an act of economic national self-sabotage on a scale we have never seen before. Remember, these things were invented here. First solar cell, 1956, Bell Labs, Edison, New Jersey. First industrial wind turbine, 1943, Grandpa's Knob, Castleton, Vermont. We should be owning these industries, and instead we have turned them over lock, stock, and barrel to our theoretical main adversary in the world. As a result, the Chinese have stolen a march on us technologically, economically, and as a result, almost certainly politically in the decades to come.
It's interesting. I agree with you that certainly the Chinese government and the Chinese economy seems to be taking advantage of very forward-thinking strategies, which I think are going to give them a leg up today and into the future. I want to linger for a moment, though, on batteries, because that was something I wanted to ask you about. Interestingly, we're starting to see that resilience in general, but particularly energy independence with solar plus storage, is now being framed not just as smart and offering enhanced peace of mind, but I have recently seen that energy independence is patriotic, which is just a different framing of that topic. But with respect to batteries, are there any particular innovations or technologies that you have your eye on that we should know about?
Uh, Absolutely. I mean, and this is a place where America still has some capacity to compete, I think, because the technology is still changing really fast, and there's lots of room for remarkable innovation. Some of it comes at the scale that we're using this stuff, and so now we're getting to grid storage, 8-hour duration or longer, figuring out how to group batteries so that we can get real long duration storage. Some of it has to do with changing chemistry of batteries. The Chinese are leading now very quickly into this sodium ion battery world, which is, sodium is not a critical mineral. That's the fifth most common element in the world's crust, Earth's crust. And there are innovative things that Americans are doing. These iron air batteries that are, at least one is under real development with a big data center in the upper Midwest, is a truly remarkable piece of technology that uses oxidation of iron, rust, as an energy storage medium. So there's lots of stuff going on at that level and lots of stuff going on at the sort of home battery level too, figuring out how to make virtual power plants work. I live in Vermont, and our biggest power plant at this point is not a power plant. It's the VPP that Green Mountain Power has chained together with the batteries in people's basements. So this stuff is ready for prime time and will just get readier and readier and readier. One of the things the Australians are going to very quickly be doing as EV sales take off, I think, is become one of the first places to really figure out how bidirectional charging through vehicle to grid V2G charging changes things too, and it will on a mass scale.
Thank you. I have many, many, many more questions, but I want to kick it back to Mike Collignan because I know we've got some audience questions. So, Mike, take it away for now.
Yes. Yeah, I got a couple to hit on, and then I'll pass it back to you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us, Bill. Had a question from Brian. He wanted to know, as a country, as the United States, how much generation should we be adding each year, or maybe it's just a 5-year target? And how much does nuclear fit into the equation?
I don't have a number for how much we should be adding. We've got to be moving very quickly to build more and more and more electric capacity because we have to transition vehicle mobility, home heating, industrial heat process, cooking, so on to electricity if we're going to ever seriously address the carbon emissions on the planet. So we need to build a lot. Let's put that there. I don't have any problem with nuclear power. People understand its risks. To me, those risks seem relatively small compared with, say, putting up a gas-fired power plant, which, if you run it exactly according to spec, will destroy the planet. So that doesn't spook me. But I do think it's unlikely to play a huge role because it's really expensive. If you have unlimited money, then go for it, and maybe someone will get small modular reactors that produce reasonably cheap energy. But you've got to be competing at this point with solar panels and wind turbines that can produce super cheap energy, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do, especially because that energy gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And remember, batteries are now allowing sun and wind to do the one thing that nuclear power could always claim as its advantage. They're able to provide firm power, baseload power, round-the-clock power. So I think the reason that we're seeing nuclear stuff is because it's what the Republicans didn't take out of the IRA. It's getting lots and lots of government subsidy, and that will continue to produce some of it. But I don't think you can make a very strong economic case for it absent that.
Okay. And then you were talking about wind power earlier. Cameron sent in a question. The manufacturing and installation of wind turbines does involve the use of fossil fuel intensive materials and processes. So curious about your perspective on that trade-off, given that wind power is a very clean energy solution.
It's not a very hard question to answer. You just run the numbers. The amount of fossil fuel that you have to use to build a wind turbine gets paid back now in a matter of months. And of course, since most of this stuff is now built in China, that's where most of the capacity for building wind turbines and solar panels are, as their grid and their industrial processes turn increasingly to using electricity that's increasingly sun and wind, there's less and less and less carbon involved in it. But that's a very poor argument for slowing down any of this. If you have to use fossil fuels to do it, that's obviously the best use of fossil fuels that there could possibly be, is to use them to, facilitate the suicide of fossil fuels.
Nice. I just had one more from Robert. We've got data centers, coming online all the time. They're using huge amounts of energy and water too. There's been the idea floated by one of them that you could deploy data centers in space. Probably a ways off, but is there a alternative data center deployment that could maybe help us solve some of the issues that we're facing?
First of all, we're not going to put this stuff in space, would be my strong inclination. Run a spreadsheet on it. It's just, look, at this point, anything that Elon Musk says should be taken with the full shaker of salt. This guy is, at this point, a Nazi nut job who has done cruel and evil things on this planet. The latest numbers for what happened when he shut down USAID were deaths in the hundreds of thousands, okay? We've all seen him giving a fascist salute to the world. So let's stop taking seriously his ideas about things, I think. the data center thing is a huge conundrum. It's a we're not at the moment actually building huge numbers of these things. We're proposing huge numbers of them, but actually not that much is getting built right now. And it's because it's not at all clear that there's very much viable business model for the AI that this is supposed to support. The next year will be very telling here, and we'll see how quickly and how big the burst of that bubble is. And that will tell us how much build out of this stuff we're going to see. In the meantime, we should be opposing most of these projects. At Third Act, we're joined with many other groups in working towards Bernie's moratorium on their construction. To use that at the very least as a bargaining lever to make sure that if we're going to build some of them, they get built with clean energy that is an addition to the grid and that does not drive up the power costs of everybody else. I have the strong feeling that this is going to be another place where the Trump administration made a series of poor decisions. So it's a live battle. It's not going to be the thing globally that tells the tale. The IEA thinks that somewhere between 1% and 3% globally of energy use by 2035 will be for data centers. But in parts of the United States, it's going to be much, much larger than that. And we should be doing what we can to head that off, at the very least, to make sure that we're not using the most primitive forms of energy. The portable diesel generators that Musk is using to power his Grok IAI factories in Mississippi and Tennessee, for example. We got a lot of work to do.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Sarah, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Bill, paint us a picture of what you think the energy transition will look like here in the US, given where we are with the current administration and the lack of federal support for the transition. How does it play out, in your opinion?
Well, if we keep MAGA in charge and they keep doing what they're doing, then 10 or 15 years from now, if we let any tourists get visas to come to this country, they'll be coming here to look at the kind of colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion, and sort of seeing how things happened back in the old days when we just set things on fire to produce energy instead of letting the sun do it for us. I don't think that will happen. I think that America, on many counts, is wising up to these guys. I hope so. And so I think that we will, at some point, resume work on a rational energy policy. I doubt we'll be able to assemble the political coalition anytime soon to get something like the IRA done again, which is very sad. But it means that we're going to have to rely on the steadily reducing cost of this stuff to make government support less important than it should be if we wanted to do this at the speed we're going to do it. That means a lot of work to make it much, much, much bureaucratically easier to do this stuff and to figure out, at the very least, how to make the financing of things going forward much easier. Those seem like key tasks for me right now.
Thanks. Now, you mentioned China's bullish strategies and approach to innovation with respect to solar, storage, EVs, general electrification, and renewable energy. Are there other countries or examples that you can highlight that are just really doing this right?
There's so many. And you see a lot of them across the EU. Spain has been particularly remarkable, and they're now reaping the benefit because they've pushed gas so far to the margins in their electric market that it only sets the price of electricity now about 9% of the time. And so their electric rates have gone up far, far less than other places in the wake of the Gulf War. They're sitting kind of pretty. Pakistan among developing countries is a story that more and more people have told. Now that story is spreading to Africa, and we're seeing remarkable progress there. Australia, as I said before, is a case study in insanity in one way, because it continues to increase or try to increase its exports of fossil fuels to the rest of the world. Truly a diabolical thing to do, especially since they're proving at home that it's not necessary as they build out very rapidly a cheap domestic electricity supply. And what's happening there is really quite remarkable. I mean, the scale at which it's happening is crazy. They just had a new in South Australia this week tender offer for firm power, 8-hour storage duration or more. And people assumed that that was probably going to go to gas plants, because that's what it would have been even a year ago. None of the gas plants came close in the bidding. All the winners were people who are building big batteries. So the change is coming all over the place. You have to fight it off with a stick to prevent it, and that's what we're doing in this country.
Now, you've spent much of your career confronting hard truths. What gives you genuine hope? Not optimism, but hope right now.
Well, this technological change is very remarkable. And the thing that gives me hope about it, I think, really, and this is probably a good place to end because it lets me be up, is that it's, among other things, congenial to us, this power transition, because it's very beautiful. I was in Rome last September because the new American Pope summoned a bunch of us over for a conference to mark the 10th anniversary of his predecessor, Pope Francis's great encyclical on climate change. And it was a great meeting. He, said, we're going to keep doing all this work. More than that, we're going to flip the switch on our solar farm outside Rome this year, and at which point the Vatican will become the first fully solar-powered nation on planet Earth, which is very good news. When I got up to speak, I said, I think that provides us not only with a cheerful thing to think about, but with our slogan going forward from here on in. Energy from heaven, not from hell. And I think that's a banner around which we can and should rally as we try and push the pace of this change.
Oh my goodness, I love that. Energy from heaven, not from hell. All right, we have 10 more minutes and I've got a couple lightning round questions for you. You ready?
Yep.
All right. One policy that you would put in place with a magic wand here in the US.
I'd make plug-in solar in all 50 states, and you don't need a magic wand. We did it in 10 states in 1 year. We should be able to establish a market and get the other 40 states in the next year. And this is not one that requires, it's not impossible in ideologically difficult territory. The first state to do it was the state of Utah, perhaps the most conservative legislature in the country, but understanding that there was a strong libertarian argument for letting people make their own power from the sun.
Mm-hmm. All right. What's one thing you've changed your mind about in the last few years?
Let me think. I've been saying mostly the same things for a long time. But I think the thing that I changed my mind about was just whether or not this was going to require us to sacrifice very much along the way. Environmentalists used to be the kind of hair shirt party about this, prepare to change your way of life because we have to protect the planet. I think it's become clear that, in fact, we can do most of the things we want to do in this world at much, much, much lower environmental cost, and that's very good news.
Does renewable energy represent an energy transition or a civilization transition?
Both. And the civilization transition, I think, is very important to understand. You know, as long as we depend on energy sources that are only available in a few places, the people who control those few places will have way too much power. And, you know, so this is an anti-oligarch policy too, which is a useful thing, I think.
All right. One book everyone should read right now. It can be yours or someone else's.
That's too loaded a question.
Okay, how about one of yours and one of someone else's?
I think, I mean, Here Comes the Sun is a good book to get a sense of where we are now. So it's fine for people to read it, and they might enjoy it. And I think it's important to read Ayanna Johnson's book, All We Can Save, just because it really provides a kind of guidebook for the work we can be doing now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Finish this sentence. The future belongs to people who?
People who turn their face to the sun.
Love that. All right. How do we convert NIMBY to YIMBY?
We keep talking about the virtues of all this stuff, including the land use virtues. One of the things that's been very important is to make people understand that clean electrons are a crop that we should be using land to grow. We don't need to use all our land. Mark Jacobson at Stanford says about 2% of the surface area of the U.S. would be sufficient between wind and sun. At the moment, we spend 30 million acres of our country growing ethanol, corn for ethanol, essentially growing gasoline. That provides 3% of our energy. If we covered that same land with solar panels, it would provide roughly 100% of the energy that we currently use. We don't want to cover Indiana and Iowa stem to stern in solar panels. We don't need to, but we do need to be using land everywhere that we can.
Wonderful. Well, Bill, your remarks really frame this as a moment of rare convergence of climate urgency, rapidly falling renewable energy costs and related technologies, and geopolitical instability. And I'm going to use a quote from you, which is, it's a moment that is both pregnant with possibility and fraught with risk. So can you just leave our audience, please, with some closing remarks and thoughts, and then also let us know how we can learn more about Third Act and any other resources that you want to tell us about that we can utilize to get more engaged on a local, municipal, state, and dare I even say federal level.
Third Act, you can go to thirdact.org. And truthfully, if you're not quite 60 yet, we don't really check ID. We've got good working groups in most of the states around the country, and we're getting a lot done. And of course, there's lots of other people doing this work that you can ally yourselves with too. But it's really important. I think the place where I would end is just to say Americans default towards the individual a little too easily. I'm glad that I've got solar panels all over my roof, and I have for a quarter century, and that they connect to the EV in the garage and on and on. But I'm aware we're not going to solve this, one Kia EV at a time. The most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual and join together with others to build the movements that allow us to change the economic and political ground rules. We saw what happened when the fossil fuel industry did that work, when they donated $500 million to the Republicans in the last election cycle. We see what they're getting out of it now. We better figure out how to do the same things. And I think that that's going to be the thing that makes the difference. If we had 40 years, 40 years from now, we're going to run the country on the planet on sun and wind just because it's so cheap. And that's good news. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind will be a broken planet. That's the burden of climate science. So our job is just to catalyze this transition and make it happen faster than it otherwise would. And I think we're capable of that. So that's why I spend all my time volunteering on this stuff. And I'm really, really grateful to everybody on this call because I know that you're engaged in the same stuff. And thank you for it immensely. And I look forward to just being in the trenches with you in the months and years ahead. On we go. And many, many thanks.
Bill, thank you so much, as always, for your insights and your inspiration to infinity and beyond. Thank you for your leadership.
Indeed, indeed.
Truly.
All right. God
All right.
bless. Take care.
Take care. Mike, back to you.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Sarah. Our next session will be a duet of sorts. We'll first hear from Laura Sullivan, who is an NPR News investigative correspondent. Sullivan is one of NPR's most decorated journalists, with 3 Peabody Awards and 3 Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Silver Batons. She's also an on-air correspondent for the PBS television show Frontline. She'll be joined then by Jake Agron. Jake is a government relations manager for James Hardie Building Products. In that role, he focuses on advocacy, coalition building, and emerging policies with a focus on resilient building in the Western United States. Laura, we'll start with you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be able to join this conference. So it's been fascinating to listen to the conversations that have been going on as well. My role in this is really a story that we did last year and started working on after Hurricane Helene came crashing through North Carolina. And it led us down this road of looking at resilient building and sustainability and asking why things are the way they are and why do we keep facing the magnitude of this destruction over and over and over again. And for us, we were doing it as a story with NPR and Frontline at the same time. So we do this a lot. We partner up and we'll public media love. And we went down in the first days after the storm had come through Asheville, and it was horrific. It's exactly what you would imagine. There was no power, there was no water, we had no communication. We were driving around in pickup trucks, talking to each other with walkie-talkies. And what we saw around us was just this complete devastation where entire homes had just they looked like matchsticks. Like you couldn't imagine how they were ever homes before. And it's so surprising when you see that for the first time, because we picture our homes as these very solid things. And here they were, like the wood itself would be like splintered down into these just like sticks. Like you couldn't make out that was a window once. No, it was all just wooden splinters sort of crumbled up in corners, smashed up against a bridge. And then you would see just these bizarre, semi-trailers smashed up against all these other trucks, and they would get stuck somewhere, and it would just be a giant pile, as if a child had come and just like smushed up their toys and threw them into an area. And we started, when we hit the ground, there were a lot of people still missing, and there were a lot of people that had died, and there were a lot of people that were looking for their loved ones. And we ended up in a place called Swannanoa, just outside of Asheville. And we ended up talking to, we came across this woman, Shalana, who was looking for her parents, who were living in a trailer home in a floodplain next to a creek. And it was elevated maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground on cinder blocks. And she had just gotten there when we met up with her. So she hadn't been into her family's trailer yet. And she was looking for her parents. She had driven up from North Carolina to find her parents who were not responding to her phone. I mean, it was really this person in the middle of this incredible crisis, and she had pulled up and she was assessing it, like, she was looking at the trailer and she was seeing that one of the walls was gone, and that it was, there was a black pickup truck that was smashed into it, and then the whole other side was missing. And she's looking around and she's saying, well, I can see their cars are still over there. She's doing this mental math, like, where could they be? Where did they go? Did they go to a shelter? And then we went in together into the trailer home, and you could see the water line on the wall, and it was, it was like 5 feet, 6 feet, it was higher than us standing there. And she really just broke down crying because, she said, I don't know if they went into the water to try to survive. And then she just looked at me and she said, neither of my parents could swim. And it was like, you just knew in that moment how this was going to end for her and her family, and just the unbelievable despair and horror of that moment. And that is sort of the reality of what these storms really look like. And when we watch them on television, it's like this amount of damage, and then the government's going to come in and pay this amount of money to rebuild, and people are going to get back on their feet. It's like this kind of just relentless onslaught, and we miss just the suffering and the humanity that's actually happening in these storms. And certainly I do too. And because they're so often and they're so frequent and they're happening more and more often and they're getting more and more severe. So at the same time, on that very same day, when we came outside the trailer, we were standing on the edge of what was now once again a, babbling brook, for a lack of a better word. But that had become a 16-foot wall of water. And looking across this creek, this little river, just looking across it, we were just all standing there, and everywhere around us, everything is destroyed. Nothing is standing, and if it is standing, it's like half standing, and there's like 2 feet of mud covering the whole area. And we looked across the way, and there's this like row of duplexes, like standing there like nothing had happened. They were elevated, about 6 feet up. They were way back from the river. They were way back out of the floodplain. They were elevated 6 feet up, and they had these remarkable things underneath that we later learned were called flood vents. And they allow floodwaters to sweep into the building and out of the building without destroying it. And I wish I could explain that they were in remarkable condition. It was like the apocalypse had happened, but like this one row of homes was just spared. And the question we had in that moment is, why aren't we all building like this? Why aren't we all doing whatever it was that these duplexes did to survive the storm? And we later talked to one of the owners of one of the duplexes, and they said, well, we took in some water, but we just have some cosmetic repairs that we're going to make. But nobody, obviously everybody was fine and nobody lost their life, and we're going to, it's just going to take us a little bit to clean up. I mean, it was to explain situation compared to these people. And when we then stepped back that the country spends on disaster, it wasn't making any sense to us that that money couldn't be spent to help people build back in a resilient way. And that question of why is this not happening? The money's there. It's like the science is clearly here. The stats are here. These people survive. These people don't. Why are we doing it this way? And why are we seeing this over and over again? And that led us down a really a path of real darkness of trying to understand what's going on here. And what we ended up finding is that there were a lot of forces at work that are keeping people from building back resiliently. And as we followed Asheville for 9 months, we started to see those forces at work. And what we saw in Asheville was, in the case of Asheville, just a real desire to not to use building codes and to fight all building codes. And there was an incredibly powerful home builders lobby and realtors lobby that was really, and not all home builders certainly in Asheville are like this, but the lobby itself was really advocating for, fewer codes, less restriction, allowing people to build where they wanted, what they wanted, because that, and allowing the builders to build the homes that way. And that it became very clear that at that point, what was going on in Asheville may be happening across the country as well. So we've covered a lot of disasters. We've, for forever, I've been to many, many disasters. And we decided to go back to 2 of them that we had spent a lot of time at. And one was Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and one was Sandy up in New York and New Jersey. And just asking the question, okay, it's been 10 years, it's been 8 years. What did you guys do? You got billions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money. How did it work out? What happened to you guys? And it was, I wish I could, we really went into these places with really high hope because I'd spent so much time there, and there was such enthusiasm for these programs that they were all implementing and how great it was going to be. And then to return, we returned up to New York and New Jersey to be like, okay, we covered all these programs you guys were involved in, build it back, all these things, build back stronger, better. And what was a community, 13 years later, that was just sort of stuck right in the middle of a recovery. It was like halfway through a recovery. And their whole philosophy in New York and New Jersey was, we're going to buy people out of their homes. And the more we investigated that and looked into it, this program just, the biggest buyout ever was a group of homes, about 500 people who banded together and said and demanded, buy us out of this neighborhood, which was right below sea level, right on the coast. And when we got there, it was they called it the jack-o'-lantern effect. Some people had built really high, 18 feet up, right? You're walking up 18 feet to get to your house. Other people had demolished and left and took the buyout. And then other people did nothing at all. And their homes looked exactly where they were, flat on the ground, below sea level, just like they were right before the storm hit. And so nobody was happy. Everybody felt like the government had failed, the community failed, everybody was really dissatisfied. And nobody liked this jack-o'-lantern effect. But what was even more shocking was when we looked at the area where, the vast majority, all but 8 neighbors, decided to up and leave. It was supposed to be, as Governor Cuomo said at the time, oyster beds and wetlands and marshlands, a sponge that will soak up the sea before it comes for people again. And so many of the politicians were talking about rebuilding. They wanted the land back. They said it was a beautiful area. One of the council members was like, this is a gorgeous area. We shouldn't be afraid of the water. We need to rebuild. And it was, it's they wanted the tax base back. this community was becoming a park, and there's no tax base with that, and there's no vibrancy, they felt like, for that. And they had these jack-o'-lantern other neighborhoods, and they wanted the communities back the way they were. And that's where 13 years brought them. So that was a fascinating look at what one community had done. And then we went back down to Houston, where, Hurricane Harvey, it was very different than Asheville, which sent mudslides and rain coming down the mountains and forcefully, shoving everything in its path side. Here, Harvey just dropped, 4 days of rain onto Houston, and it couldn't absorb the rain. And eventually the dam had to be released. So we went back to say, and I remember being there right after the storm, and they were saying, we're going to build back better and safer and stronger, and this is going to be fantastic. And I talked to the guy at the dam who worked for the Army Corps, and he said, we're going to fix this, and we're going to change everything, and we're going to make it so this doesn't happen again. And so we went back to the top of this dam, and it's a dam, but it's kind of unusual. It's really just a big berm. It's like just a big, dirt giant mound, little mountain, and then behind it is a natural reservoir. So any other day of the week, it's just a pretty park. And during a giant storm, when there's too much water, the reservoirs then flood. The park floods. And during Harvey, it flooded so much that they had to release the water into downtown Houston, because otherwise the berm was going to break. And if you break the berm, then the water doesn't release quietly, it releases violently. And then you're talking about major loss of life. And so they released it into Houston and flooded Houston, and they flooded the people below. But in the meantime, in the 8 years since Harvey, they had decided to start developing in the reservoir. In the reservoir, there are now 20,000 more homes in the natural reservoir since Harvey than there were before Harvey. So something is happening in people's minds after these incredible catastrophes where it stays for a while. And a lot of experts said that this inertia develops. Like, it is really hard to do giant projects that alter the way a community lives or the way a community thinks. And it gets stuck in the mud, literally, and then nothing happens. And then over time, the storm is forgotten, the catastrophe is forgotten, and the desire to build returns. And that's what we saw in both those places. And we wondered if Asheville was going to follow in those same footsteps. So when we were in Asheville, we were really wondering if they were going to be able to hold to stronger building codes about how people were going to build, especially in areas that were dangerous. And one of the first hurdles that we came upon was that people don't know that they're living in an area that's dangerous. So most people are depending on FEMA's flood maps, which are woefully out of date across the entire country. And we found more than two times as many Americans live in dangerous flood areas than have any awareness they're even in a dangerous area. So millions of Americans have no idea that they're even in a danger zone. So that's an enormous hurdle to pass. And because these flood maps are not mapped for rainfall, and they're mapped really for ocean hurricane flooding storms, it's missing significant areas of danger, like Asheville, like Houston. And that is creating a problem for people in the middle of these catastrophes. So the idea that people are going to depend on FEMA's flood maps in order to understand that they even have a problem is not working right now. And so that's basically leaving building codes to save people. And what we found is that even the tiniest, wind sheathing and I'm going to get all the building. I know I'm talking to a lot of builders, but I'm going to get all these names wrong. But even in the, even in the tiniest little ways to make a building stronger, they were absolutely fighting tooth and nail against. Congressman Edwards from that area in North Carolina said, the American way is to let people build the way they want. And that is at the foundation of the debate. Should we as a society tell people you need to do this so that you can save yourself from catastrophe? Or do we let people face catastrophe if they choose to? And it's a difficult question because, like I said, most Americans don't know that they're even in danger and maybe would make a different choice. But it's also confusing because it's taxpayers and the entire national community writ large that pays the cost when a community doesn't have resilient building codes. So the two things we found at the end of the day that might possibly save people were flood insurance, which forces you to carry flood insurance and mandates how you're going to rebuild or renovate, and building codes. And both of those nationally are completely under attack. And the movement right now is to dismantle sort of both of those initiatives. So not to end on a bleak note, but it seemed like by the time we got to the end of this project that this was going to keep happening. And most scientists we spoke to said these storms are going to be stranger, in places you're not expecting, more severe, and more frequent as time moves on. And most people felt that it was just a matter of time before, the next storm hits and we got to rent the pickup truck and go down again and see if we can try to cover this. There are some people there are developers that we talk to that want to build really strong homes and don't want to build them in the wrong place. And the question is sort of which side is going to win, and which side is going to move forward, because there is a huge affordability crisis going on right now for Americans and homes and being able to live in a home. And that's real. And a lot of builders are saying, we're just trying to provide the American dream for people. The problem is if you're, Shalana's parents who thought that they had finally found a place to live and had, we're going to retire there in this place next to a really lovely creek, and ended up getting swept away. They later found, it took weeks, it was about 6 or 8 weeks before they found Shalana's parents. They had been buried. It seemed like they had been swept out of the trailer and had been swept down the river and were sort of among all the debris. And Shalana was telling me that, when she was looking, she would look for her parents day after day. She would just walk up and down, looking everywhere, seeing if she could find them. And she told me that she would always stop at the bridge where so much stuff had gotten sort of jammed up against the bridge. And she would just stop there every time she would go on these long walks up and down the river looking for her parents. And when she finally talked to the coroner, he told her that that's where they found her mother. So that's the end of my sad story.
Laura, well, thank you so much. You're a wonderful storyteller, and thank you for sharing the insights of your year-long investigation. I have a multitude of questions for you, but I think what we're going to do first is go to Jake, who's going to talk for about 10 minutes. He'll give us a little bit of a different perspective on some policy. A lot of his work is in the western half of the country. So rather than superstorms and floods and hurricanes, I think he's a little more focused on wildfires and drought and things like that. And then once Jake is done in about 10 minutes, Laura, let's bring you back in and we'll do a little bit of Q&A. But again, thank you for that heartbreaking story. Jake, if you want to turn on your camera and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Laura, for sharing your experience as well. There's a lot of overlap in what's happening in the western half of the U.S., all the way to Hawaii, and we're seeing some of the same challenges. So again, my name is Jake Agron, and at James Hardie, we make resilient building products, including non-combustible fiber cement siding, Class A rated timber decking, and even structured pergolas and cabanas. So basically, when you're looking at a home, everything that you see other than windows, doors, and roofs. As this group knows, resiliency is at the heart of sustainability. So we care deeply about not only the beauty of our products on homes, but also withstanding the changing weather events and natural disasters of our time. I have the privilege in speaking with government officials throughout the western part of the US, particularly in areas where wildfire is a top of mind risk. Thank you again to Green Builder Media for the opportunity to share some of what I see every day in terms of policies that are impacting how we make our communities and homes more resilient. And honestly, some of the exact same conversations are being held in the halls at the Capitol in Denver, Sacramento, Olympia, Salem. The exact conversations are happening in silos. And so I get to have the privilege of getting to kind of share what I'm seeing in various communities. When I see how communities and policymakers are addressing resiliency in building, I really group things in my mind into three different categories, and they're not mutually exclusive to one another. And you really have your carrot, your stick, and your education. And the carrot type of policies are those that incentivize building resiliently. Your stick is really what we talked about. Laura referenced some of the building codes saying we're not giving any of the option anymore. This is the new code. This is how we're going to build going forward to what standard. And then the third that I think really can't be forgotten is education. And sometimes that's through direct policy, other times it's through community education and non-legislative means. So I'll be talking a little bit about what I see in each category in the area of resilient building. So looking first at your what I call carrot policies, you see a lot of different programs that incentivize building more resiliently. One of the biggest programs out there that states are adopting is the Fortified Roof Program. This is a program, as many in this audience probably know, are where the state or a locality provides an incentive to rebuild or fortify your roof using IBHS, which is the Insurance Institute for Building Business and Home Safety, a set of standards to make your roof more resilient. You see grants somewhere in the range of $10,000. Sometimes it's in the form of a tax credit, but that's one way that states and localities are incentivizing building more resiliently. You see, if you go to the Fortified Roof web page, you'll see which states offer what types of incentives for fortified roofs. It's mostly Gulf states, But there was a bill, for example, sent to Governor Paulus this session in Colorado that would establish a similar program in Colorado. And that's really because of, you see in the Gulf more because of wind and hurricane. In Colorado, certainly hail is driving a lot of the need to have more resilient roofs. You also see home hardening grant incentive programs. This is for typically materials beyond just roofs, like the fortified program. They're not as common in terms of programs that are enacted, but certainly we are seeing a avalanche of proposals to incentivize more home hardening, particularly in California after the Altadena and Palisades fires. So a few examples that we've seen this year in California and Sacramento, bills like AB 1888. These are grants for contractors who do wildfire mitigation work. And there'll be no quiz at the end on these bill numbers, but for those who like to take notes and look them up for the language, I like to provide what bill numbers they are. And again, in California, AB 1971, this is a bill that would exclude home hardening from property tax assessment values. Again, in California, AB 1964, and it would create a state fire marshal home hardening certificate program. SB 1084 in California, these would be tax credits for home hardening. And finally, in California, SB 1960, this is a grant program for cohesive fire communities. So this would be criteria that would be developed so that if a certain percentage of homes in your community are certified as hardened against wildfires, you could potentially qualify for funding. And I think this is really inspired out of communities like Dixon Trails in Escondido, California, which was a new community built using the wildfire prepared standard. So that's kind of your taste of what certain programs look like at a policy level that incentivize building more resiliently. On the flip side, you see your stick, your building codes to require more resilient building. One of the biggest that I point to is in Colorado, where the entire state developed a model statewide resiliency code. This developed out of a bill passed in 2023 that then had a board comprised of multiple sectors to help write a minimum state code that cities and counties would then be required to adopt at a minimum and then tailor to their local needs. One of the biggest reasons for this code success in requiring new resilient building was because there was a diverse board of stakeholders such as builders, code officials, fire officials, elected officials, all coming together to write the code. So those stakeholders were at the table. And the new code sets new requirements for new construction and significant alterations of homes within the state's wildland urban interface, and includes new building material requirements and vegetation requirements. So hopefully a little bit of hope there of an example of a state that is being proactive to build more resiliently. And then another example I like to point to is you've had legislation passed in Utah, Washington, and Oregon now that limit HOAs and planned communities' ability to prohibit resilient retrofitting of homes within those communities if they're in a fire-prone area. So I think that's an interesting momentum that we've seen in those states where you've had some success there in limiting one layer of local government, that being HOAs and planned communities' ability to stop a homeowner from making their home more resilient to fire. And then finally, we see a category of legislation and policy that has to do with providing the consumer, providing the community more information and education. And sometimes that's bridging the knowledge and resource gap of builders, consumers, code writers, and even insurers on what resiliency can look like. So some examples there in Montana in 2025, we saw legislation that explicitly allowed insurers to provide discounts for resilient building materials on the home. That helped inform the market and homeowners that, hey, you might qualify for a premium discount or reduction if you make your home more resilient to wildfire. And of course, insurers could do that without the legislation, but it shines a light on, but by having it now in statute in Montana, you have almost the state leadership endorsing the importance of that kind of issue. Um, we've also seen legislation introduced in California to require insurers to provide homeowners with different two different premium rates depending on if their home were hardened versus if it were not. That bill, I don't know that's going to pass this session, but it's an interesting way to just provide the homeowner with more education of what their overall affordability might look like to maintain that home if they had more home hardening on it. And finally, again, back to Colorado in 2025, they passed a law that would require insurance providers to disclose wildfire risk scores and methodology to homeowners and the insurance commissioner as part of their rate filings. So again, that would provide more information and sunlight that consumers, builders could use to understand if you build more resiliently with like non-combustible building materials, what that would mean for your insurance. And finally, I'll just say that education, it doesn't have to be mandated through legislation. There's some amazing programs out there, such as the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, Firewise community, where groups of homeowners are coming together naturally to certify and make their community more prepared for wildfire. And similarly, IBHS conducts trainings on wildfire prepared and prepared plus standards. Um, those programs help shine a light on what you can do to make your home more resilient to wildfire. So that's a look about recent policy that we're seeing, particularly in the western half of the US, on more incentivizing and requiring more resilient building. And really, I'll conclude that it really does matter to build more resiliently in the first place because communities don't always come back. And that's really a detriment to the fabric of those communities. So not just individual homes, but the collective makeup of the community resiliency.
Jake, thank you so much. I'm glad that we went in the order that we did because after Laura's heartbreaking and sobering story, I'm really happy, Jake, that you were able to give some examples that serve as a little bit of an antidote. And Laura, if you wouldn't mind popping your camera and your mic on, I've got way more questions than we have time for because we only have about 10 minutes, but let me dive in. Laura, kind of my urgent question for you is after now, your year-long intensive investigation and subsequent time since, focused on disaster recovery, what shocked you the most? Not about the storms themselves or the impact of the storms, but about us.
Me the most was the
Oh,
extraordinary.
Laura, we cannot hear you. I can't
You
hear
can't
you.
hear me? Can you hear me? I've got my audio on. Can you hear me?
Okay, if you turn it up just a little bit more, maybe.
Uh,
There you go. We're
can
good.
you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. Um, I think what shocked me the most was really just the insane amount of money that we're spending on disaster recovery. And and spending it on the back end rather than on the front end. And it's just kind of an anathema to how we spend money in this country. We like to solve the problem after the problem has happened. We don't. It's historically in 30 years of journalism, we just don't seem to want to spend the money up front. But it was surprising to me when with just the sum of money that we spend each year on disaster recovery, from fires to flooding to everything else, that and year after year after year after year, that we're not coming in to do this in a different way and doing it wholesale with $50 billion. You can do a lot of good building with $50 billion. So instead, as we interviewed the former head of FEMA, Greg Fugate, who's just was the administrator for FEMA for many years, and we asked him, "What are we doing here? Like, what happened in all these places?" And he just said, "We put a lot of stuff right back where it was." And that was kind of like, that became the measure of success, that you rebuild the community, but you're just putting the stuff right back where it was. And so it was surprising to me, because a lot of times we get into these stories and it's like, well, there's no money for this because people don't really care about this and taxpayers don't want to spend money on this. And you can be like, well, they should, or it's better for society. But it's like, but here, there's billions of dollars. There's so much money in this. So it was surprising that it's more how we're spending it, not that people don't care or that taxpayers aren't willing to help communities come back. They are. It's just how we're using it.
Thanks. And Jake, let me ask you a question. Why, just to what Laura just said, why do you think it's easier to rebuild the same vulnerable homes and communities than build a more resilient one? And kind of the second layer of the question is, what is the biggest disconnect between what the agencies that you talk about say that they want versus what they actually incentivize?
Yeah, a few factors are at play in rebuilding the same vulnerable home. I think the first is information gap. When you're dealing with the replacement of a home covered by insurance, some insurers are just not aware of more resilient material options that will conform to the character of the home and community while still being more resilient to various perils. There can be a gap in homeowner understanding of alternate or more resilient materials as well. Um, Sometimes there's historic or planning barriers. Communities often mandate use of certain materials, like in historic districts, for example, that are not as resilient as modern, yet proven materials like fiber cement. Fiber cement represents 1/5 of the siding market in the US. Other four materials being vinyl, wood, or engineered wood, brick, and stucco. And it's still an information gap, but also a cultural barrier as to what each of those materials offer in resiliency. And then finally, it's cost. We all know saying you get what you pay for. The same is true for exterior siding of your home, the layer of protection against outside elements. And so, it's that's often at play. But I think it's changing too. In LA, Colorado, Maui, communities aren't exclusively rebuilding the same way. I was in Lahaina last month, and we do work with Habitat for Humanity there, and we are using non-combustible siding now after the fires there. And actually, no, that wasn't a wildfire, but it was a fire that spread in only 15 minutes. So building back more resiliently, it's not happening at the pace that we want it to happen, I'm sure, but it is happening. Um, and Sarah, I think the second part of your question was disconnect between um, what we're seeing. Uh, I think just the need to incorporate resilient building into the overall value of building. So, there's going to be less maintenance. Oftentimes, there's going to be less chance of needing to rebuild. So, as we talk about making housing more affordable, it's not about the cost out the door. It's about the cost of home ownership as well. And so I think there's a disconnect there.
Indeed. Okay, so we have about 4 more minutes. So, Laura, one quick question for you, and then Jake, one more for you. Laura, you've spent time with families whose lives were permanently altered by disaster. What does resilience mean to them that policymakers and industry leaders often miss? And second part, are you more optimistic or more alarmed about America's ability to adapt after disaster, after you've reported from the front lines of crisis for years?
I think for many of the families, what you see in the aftermath of a disaster is an incredible, just sort of human desire to rebuild as fast as they can, to get back in their home, to reopen their business, to get back to normal. It's such an unbearable process to lose your home or to be out of your home for 9 months, a year, trying to navigate the building permits or this or that, or find the money, or you don't have insurance, or how are you going to, what kind of grant program can you get? And you're living in someone else's house, or you're trying to squeeze out an apartment somewhere where everybody else is too. And or you're living in a camper on your property. And they're so destructive that people, it's just human nature to just be like, I just want to put it back together. And I think what you see time and again in people in this chaos is like, just let me put my house back together, and then I promise you I will talk about resilient building. But what gets lost in that is that you kind of got to do it all at once. You got to elevate your home the first time you're fixing it, or you have to put up different materials, or fireproof your roof, or lock down your roof so it won't get blown away in the next hurricane. Like, there's these things you have to do the first time, and it's just so hard for people. And if we had some kind of process that was like, we're here with you, like, we know you're in the middle of the worst moment of your lives, but we've got a plan for you. We can assess the situation. Here's the money you can and can't have, and here's where you're at. And then, like, here's what we need you to do when you rebuild, and like, keep it moving so that they're not stuck in this molasses, which it just seems like that everybody's always stuck in. And that's where you get the, like, throw your hands in the air and say, I'm just gonna put my house back together, I'll worry about this later. So that's the reality of it on the ground. If you ask any homeowner, do you want to live in a safe house or a not safe house, they're going to say, I want to live in a safe house. But like, we got to help people use all this money that's available to get there, and help them create a path, because they don't really think average homeowner has no idea what kind of roof they need, or what kind of siding, or what, they don't know. Right. And it's only in the middle of this, like, heartache that they're being thrown all this information, and they can't, it's like, I can't even afford that. I can't even afford my rent right now. I can't even afford this trailer I'm living in. So, that's sort of the reality that we find time and again in these situations. And I forget your last question. I'm sorry.
Well, that's good, because I'm going to kick one over to Jake in 60 seconds or less. Jake, that is, so Laura brought up this idea, this kind of rhetorical question, that should probably become an actual question that we are all talking about and asking ourselves, which is, do we let people make their own decisions, or do we mandate how to build, whether that's through flood insurance or building codes, in your opinion? And maybe, do those things help alleviate pressure and decision making for consumers, or do they just add costs in a way that are unfathomable?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the political answer, and that I think you have to strike a balance between the two and make sure that policymakers have as much education to come up with those decisions on how to craft building codes and incentives for building resiliently. I only got 30 seconds, so I just wanted to plug in IBHS and Headwaters Economics did a study that in October 2025 that making a built home harden only adds 2 to 3% to the entire cost of the home. And people should just know that. Prospective homeowners should know that and make the informed decision of does that upfront cost, is it worth it to have a safer home and keep my insurance rates obtainable and keep my community in place. So really, we just need to arm our citizens, our policymakers with that knowledge.
Wonderful. Well, Laura and Jake, thank you so much for your insights, for your knowledge. I have literally 10 more questions I'd love to ask you both, and I'm sorry that we're out of time. But again, thanks for a really fascinating session that shifted from storytelling to policy and, sadness to hopefulness and optimism. I know there's this whole conversation is laced with both of those things running through them. So thank you for your work and appreciate you joining the symposium.
Thanks
And
so much
Mike,
for having
Thank
us.
you.
yeah, thank you. Mike, back to you to introduce the next round of speakers and session.
All right, thank you. For our final session of the day, we're going to have an interactive group discussion. Our panel, representing three distinctly different builders, will discuss what it actually takes to lead through uncertainty, but they will also be fielding rapid fire audience questions. Now, I've been hosting Green Builder Media webinars for just about 14 years now, and I know that our audiences are inquisitive, so don't let me down today, people. So, who will you be asking questions of? Well, we have from Beezer Homes, we have their Director of Sustainability and Building Science, Megan Cordes, the founder of Howard Building Science, Rob Howard, and the president and partner of Allaire Homes Red Tree, Brandon Bryant. Sarah?
Thanks. Megan, Brandon, Rob, you're three of my favorite people in the industry. So I am so happy to share the next 45 minutes-ish with you all. Thanks for being here. One of the threads that connects all three of you is that we have either done or are in the process of doing one of our Vision House demonstration projects with you. So Megan, Rob, and Brandon, in that order, in 3 sentences or less, would you just talk about the Vision House projects that we've been able to do or are underway, and just talk a little bit about some of the goals and objectives for those projects? Megan, you're first.
Oh, okay.
Megan,
Sorry.
Rob, and Brandon. Let's go in that order.
Okay. Yeah, that works. The 3 sentence limit. I love this. Okay. Beezer, 100% of our starts are zero energy ready, or at this point, efficient new homes, as of the end of 2025. So we are building more efficiently than any other national builder on a very large scale. Where we did the Vision House, we have the opportunity in Las Vegas to do a couple of things side by side. First, we built how we typically build, which is also already super efficient, all electric with solar. And then we looked at what does the future look like? What could it potentially look like? And we looked into all the different deployable technologies that we thought could be viable in the future for the way that we build. And that was our Vision House. Next to that, we built a deconstructed house to show all of the things that are in the walls that a home buyer wouldn't normally see. They could walk in and see the better insulation, see slab insulation, the way our duct runs work, how ERVs are transferring air throughout our homes. Just a really cool display of all of the science that goes into our homes and how everything works together as a system.
Fantastic. That was great. Rob, you're up.
Well, not Vegas, but just not Vegas. And kudos, to Beezer for the commitment they've made.
Oh, Rob, I don't know. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Brandon and Megan, is that, yeah? Maybe turn your sound up. I think so.
I'll give it a shot. So Hickory Grove is an example of missing middle housing, what I call sustainable, attainable housing. It's an infill, small multifamily project in Hickory, North Carolina. And it's a build for rent project that's going to be built with off-site, specifically volumetric modular construction.
Thank you. And Brandon.
Yeah, good afternoon, most people here. I guess maybe good morning. There's a few. Um, yeah, our Asheville house called Harmony is built on three pillars. One, resiliency. If you know anything about Asheville, North Carolina, we just experienced a hurricane. So that is resiliency, a big part of it. The same thing as the value metrics over cost per square foot metrics is another pillar that we're using this house as a demonstration house on. And then one near and dear to my heart as wellness architecture and the ability to just transform people's lives, but also take wellness not just as an add-on, as an integrated part of our design. It's seen as a collective, just like we do with a lot of high performance building.
Thanks, Brandon. All right, I'm going to start with the rapid fire questions. Megan, if you could permanently change one thing about how Americans think about homes, what would it be?
I would say we should think about homes as a system, not just what we can see, but everything that goes into it, so that we wouldn't be taken by the next gimmick that somebody throws at us. We would really be thoughtful about how we approach what we do to our homes.
Awesome.
And in order.
Brandon, how about you? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think and would agree with Megan. I kind of, for my add-on would be that how us as home builders can see how we can transform people's lives. We spend 90% of our time indoors. Most of the time that might be at home, definitely for the people that work from home. And just really seeing how we can enhance the human health of humans through the homes we build, for what we're putting in the home and what we choose not to put in the house.
Rob, how about you?
Does it sound any better?
Not great.
I'll keep. So I guess my answer would be we need to move from NIMBYism to YIMBYism. From not in my backyard to yes in my backyard. Everybody deserves an opportunity to live in a sustainable, healthy, affordable, durable, efficient. So it takes an intentional choice by the community to create housing opportunities.
And Rob, I think, I don't know if you're on a headset or Bluetooth, but that might be betraying you. So we maybe if while I ask a few more questions to Megan and Brandon, if you can switch that audio, it's still a little hanky. Thank you. Brandon, what aspect about the housing industry frustrates you the most?
I think maybe we've already hit on it a little bit, and Rob just hit on something that near and dear to my heart recently, trying to do a development, and the one-star Google reviews I got for just having a conversation with the potential land. But really, I think it's the legislative part. I think I've seen housing, which I would deem it, one of the essential things for us as humans is become such a political football that that we just are all over the place with it. And a lot of people who don't quite understand housing or what we're doing are the people making decisions. So, and that's what frustrates me the most. And even at times where I can try to see both sides of it, I can find that a commonality of coming together to enhance where we're going to be. I even find that to be difficult.
Megan, a related question. What's a problem in housing that we're not talking enough about today?
I guess if you don't mind me waxing philosophical a little bit, I think that I probably have a unique perspective here as a publicly owned, or not publicly owned, sorry, publicly traded builder. I've been talking about utilities today. A publicly traded builder, that the things that we can do to improve our homes are not, we don't get to see and our homeowners don't necessarily see the value in it right away. I think we need time to make it work. And sometimes when we don't see monetary benefits immediately, it gets taken as that's not working. But given time, we see the benefit, and we've proved that. But right, in this environment, I think more and more big money is in housing, and it makes it difficult to take risks and make investments into things that are more long term than quarterly.
Thanks, Megan. Rob, what about you? How would you answer that? What problem in housing are we not talking enough about today?
My audio gonna be better.
I don't know. Try it again.
It tells me the answer is no. Um, so yeah, I guess the problem that I'm having, at least in housing at this point, is I think we need more creative financing products
Mm.
for missing middle housing as well as off-site construction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Brandon, tell us a little bit more about wellness architecture. What is it and why is it so important?
Yeah, I'm just pulling up on my screen a quote so I don't quote somebody, but it was Dr. Miller, University of Texas, had this to say: architects and designers have a greater ability to improve public health than medical professionals. And when you just sit there and let that sink in for a minute, that I don't think anyone and hopefully all the people here are thinking about this, but I don't think our industry as a whole or the public sector is really thinking about how we can improve public health. And for a doctor to actually say we could have a greater chance to improve public health than medical professionals. I think we always think about housing from the doom and gloom of, oh, a house has got mold, it's got this. And maybe we're talking about indoor air quality at times. Some builders will be, some and water. But, for me, wellness architecture, it's an intentional design of a home as a living system. Megan mentioned that just supports the human health throughout the daily experience. So, just as she said, is rather than treating it as an add-on, wellness isn't an add-on, in my opinion. It's something you do through the design and then through the build that integrates air, light, the layout of the floor plan, materials, definitely technology. Hopefully at the end result would be reduced stress, better sleep quality, supporting the natural rhythms. And then all this kind of works quietly in the background. That technology is it's doing it for our occupants. And it's something that's hard to measure sometimes, but I think you notice it when you notice it, right? And you have to have a little longevity with wellness. No one goes to the gym day one, you come out a little sore, but you don't see those results for a few weeks, maybe a month. And that's what my intent is here with wellness architecture, is really that transformation of someone's health. Previously when we would have clients, we'd ask them, hey, do you have asthma? Do you have these? And it was just spot kind of conditions. It's changed our mindset of just really, hey, you came to me wanting some countertops, maybe a view of the mountains, but have you ever thought of us as someone that's going to improve your public health? And that's a real game changer. And you have to give a client a little bit of time to even let that soak in as well. So yeah, that's where wellness architecture is for me.
Yeah, an interesting data point. So Green Builder Media, we've been surveying our consumer audience for 21 years now. And, I would say before millennials got into the market, and certainly before the pandemic, the concept of healthy home was really the purview of indoor air quality and physical health. But certainly, even before the pandemic, when again millennials started getting into the market at scale, and then during and since the pandemic, we've seen that mental and emotional health is now as important as physical health. So one of the things, Brandon, I like about your approach to wellness, and Rob and Megan, your approaches as well, is that really do combine the emphasis on physical, mental, and emotional health, and you don't consider one necessarily more important or over the others. So thank you for that. Rob, why have you chosen to focus on small footprint net zero infill projects when the market really often rewards bigger homes and, a different model than what you're pursuing?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of a passion project for me, but as you know, my background's with Habitat for Humanity, so I spent 15 years, in the trenches in affordable housing, and most of the homes that, I built in my career were around 1,200 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, so very simple structures. And I've really carried a lot of the lessons learned from that experience into my own company and the homes that I'm building now. But I was really inspired by Ross Chapin, the architect from the Pacific Northwest, who wrote the book on pocket neighborhoods. And I saw him speak at an innovative housing summit in Atlanta back in 2018, and that's really what led me down this path. So yeah, to deliver the type of missing metal product that I'm trying to build, it really forces you to do infill projects on existing infrastructure. But I also want to put, my building science spin on it. Everything I build is, to this DOE zero energy ready home standard, or what they now call efficient new homes, and with the goal of achieving a net zero energy community.
Thank you. Megan, you've pointed out that Beazer right now is the only production builder on a national level that is committed to the Efficient New Homes program, to building all of your homes that you build across the country to that program. How is that proving to be a winning strategy for Beazer?
Yeah, so I think I'll start by saying that the way that we have been able to accomplish this is by fundamentally changing the way we think about our homes. We're not doing anything that doesn't make sense long term or at scale. So we are being thoughtful and in our design and planning and execution to make sure that what we're doing is something that we can continue to do, and we can do at the volume that we build in 17 markets across the country. The success that we're seeing is that we can, and we're getting more and more data every day on this. And I love to see it as a scientist. We're seeing immediate savings for our homeowners in their total cost of ownership. So their mortgage plus utility plus insurance. And a lot of that, of course, is our energy efficiency, and a huge chunk of it is utility bill savings. But we also see insurance savings in the way that we build. We've got different folks on the mortgage side working on green appraisals and making sure that we're seeing savings on that end as well. So we're just seeing the entire system and the way that we build and trying to be transformative on a big scale, as opposed to anything that we can't duplicate over and over again.
Quick follow-up question on that, Megan. Are buyers recognizing those long-term benefits and choosing to purchase your homes over, say, your competitors' homes that might be across the street?
Yeah, and look, that didn't just happen. We have spent 5 years honing our skills on this and understanding what messages resonate with buyers and how to talk to them about this without being too scientific on one side or not talking about it at all on the other side. Like, where's the medium, and how do we build relationships with our buyers to allow us to enter into those conversations in a way that they trust and understand the benefits, monetarily and also wellness wise. So yeah, it's been a lot of work, but we're there.
Awesome. That's our concept of value per square foot in action. So you're proving it out. Thanks, Megan. Rob, at your core, you are a building scientist, among many other things, but you're a building scientist in the professional sense. So what's something about human behavior that even the best building science can't solve?
Well, as builders, we only have, control of the construction process. So in some ways, I think building a high performance home is almost the easy part. It's keeping that home high performance, throughout its life cycle. That's the hard part. So trying to set the buyer, the homeowner, up for success, with at least some basic training on home maintenance and, what it takes to keep the home high performance for the long term. The reality is some homeowners aren't, physically capable of doing even some of that basic maintenance. So, we typically will include at least a year of HVAC maintenance in the contract, in the cost of the house, so that that's sort of baked in and at least get them, started on the right foot.
That's interesting. It's, that whole concept of behavioral modification, and it kind of ties to the questions that we asked at the end of the last session about, do you leave it up to consumers to make choices that will enhance the performance and resiliency and the health of their homes, or do you mandate it so that it becomes a must-have? Brandon, switching gears a little bit, how has living through a disaster changed your definition of success and your understanding of what a home is supposed to do for its occupants? And what do you think that people who haven't lived through a disaster don't understand about the trauma?
Sarah, that's the most loaded question I've been asked in a while. I have a
Awesome.
feeling. Yeah, I'll see what emotionally I can go through. I'll answer that the last part first. Of course, have heard of hurricanes. I have went to areas after hurricanes. I don't think I ever expected to experience a hurricane, at least right where I live. I also was so naive even after the storm. This is the closest thing that we've ever had to a blackout. I mean, we had no cell service, no power, no water. We didn't have water for months. Anyway, and it was daily. I was getting more information, and it was like a morning, even more for the town that I live in and grew up here. And then a lot of survivor guilt, man, and it's still stuck with me and still with me. I asked my friends in Florida, like, how do you guys live through these? You act like they're a party. And this was life changing for me. I know people who passed away and could give you some just just terrible stories. It's changed my life. Success is different, right? It's, I've always wanted to leave a legacy. Well, what was a legacy that I would leave? But also I think, just value and family, what we're doing when we come to house. So like family, like that's more success than I think I ever thought it was being. Let me just take moments and be in the moment, because I was go, go, go and a mile wide, inch deep kind of thing, just whatever I could do. And I'm trying to be more intentional. Definitely after that storm. I also think from building, I'm trying to be intentional. We don't have a lot of land available. A lot of land I look at is on the side of a mountain. The hurricane, what a lot of people think of is the flooding. I think for me, it was the amount of trees that we lost, the canopies, trees on houses, and mudslides. So, is that a good place to be building a house? And maybe, and I've found myself prior, but even more now, that maybe I don't want to be the builder that's building on that side of that mountain, because there's always the downhill effects of what we're doing there. So I think, I could even take it from the point of liability and all of that, but really just I hope that people come to me as a trusted advisor about how to build here from all aspects, but it's really site placement and how to build. And I think that's a high calling to be asked to do. And if I told someone, sure, I can build on it, but should I build on it? And here's the risk, and here's what happens, and here's the mitigation we would need to take, not just for your house, but the four houses down below you. So, I could probably go on for 30 minutes. I know we don't want to. I think there's a lot that's changed for me personally, for sure, but our business practice of being more mindful of the resources we have, and that's the land we have here. Is the beauty that we have in Western North Carolina. To Rob's count, well, I wish our city council and people would talk to about a UDO, and so we could get more in the places that we need to build and change some of these things. I think it has started to have that conversation here, because I think no one loves when we see the houses up on the mountains, nor down toward Rob when he's been Boone and North Carolina in those areas. But we also know there's views. But when we really need people around the transit areas, and we've had regulations that push people farther out, and so there's some good things that can come from a storm, if we can find a silver lining.
Shifting gears a little bit, Megan, production building gets criticized for prioritizing speed and volume over quality and innovation. But what do people fundamentally misunderstand about trying to drive sustainability at scale?
I would say that sorry, you said speed and volume. Okay, so I wouldn't call it prioritizing speed and volume over quality and innovation. I would say All of those things are top of mind, but speed and volume is really hard to hit, but also required for us. So I think when we think of, obviously we're building quality homes and we are innovating. So I do think it's possible, but sorry if I'm being a little disjointed here. I think that when we change something, we're not just spending more for that product. We are spending the time it takes to train our trades because nobody has ever done the things that we're doing before. We are spending the time to train our internal folks because they need to understand why we're doing this and why it's important, and how to do it and how to make sure it's done correctly. So changing things is not just an easy flip of a switch. It's a whole change in the way that we do our processes and think about the way that we build. So, I think sometimes people expect me to say, haha, we're so much better than other builders. I think that we are focusing on efficiency, sustainability, and innovation in a way that's unprecedented. But I don't think that that means it's easy and that everybody should jump on it and do it right away. I think we need to be thoughtful. We need to understand how the industry works and how we can approach this in a way that will continue to make builders profitable because they have to be or we won't exist anymore. So I ride that line a lot.
I bet. I bet. And it's a challenging line, I'm sure. Rob, what does craftsmanship mean in the age of AI, automation, and algorithmic design?
It means more than ever. We've all heard about the coming silver tsunami, but we're already experiencing it in the construction industry as our skilled trades and the craftsmen that we've relied on for the history of this industry are retiring at a faster rate than we're training their replacements. So that's really one of the primary reasons that I'm focused on offsite or what's sometimes called industrialized construction, and feel strongly that it's one of the solutions to the housing crisis.
Indeed. Brandon, have you ever walked into a space and immediately felt that it was healing? And if so, what created that feeling?
Right. My first reaction to that, yes, I have. I went into the Grove Park and I felt like after I realized I'd paid $300 for that spa treatment, it does feel healing in there. But I think you're probably talking more residential space. But I keep thinking about what we can learn from commercial application when I come to a residential application. I just had a client just talk about their spa experience in a resort down in Mexico, and we're doing their whole basement focused on a spa and wellness, and it's really focused on what they experienced. So I think there's a lot to learn when we go to commercial buildings that have a spa feel. So like when I go to Grove Park, which is only once every 5 years, is to their spas, it's got a lot of common, but it's even from the rocks and how rocks can be healing. They got a certain amount of light and it's that scent and smell. So I think it's all those things that you just you experience on a daily basis, but you don't experience at that very hyper focused level of like, okay, I'm intentionally doing things here, right? Like, I don't have a Glad plug-in here to have an artificial smell. This is lavender that's a natural smell that my human body just naturally relaxes, right? So I haven't been in too many, I would say, residential places I'd say that would give me that effect. So I do find a lot of inspiration from traveling and definitely in those more commercial applications.
Thank you. Megan, if every housing executive had to spend 1 week living in the average American home, not the model, what do you think that they would immediately want to change in our current product offering?
So, do you mean average new home or average existing home? Because my answers vary just slightly.
Why don't you give a little bit of each?
Okay, so for an existing home, because I've been doing this for a long time, and there's what they would want and what they should want. So they're going to move into an existing home and they're going to be like, wow, it's drafty in here. I need to switch out my windows. And that's wrong, because that's not going to help. So what they should want is air sealing and then insulation and then a variable speed heat pump and then an EV charger.
Awesome. Love
Um,
that.
yeah.
Make it easy. Yep.
And then for an average new home, I still think we need to go farther with air sealing. I think everybody's going to be slightly uncomfortable until we do better at air sealing across the board. But after that, variable speed heat pumps. I think those are huge, and they make such a difference in comfort. And they're they don't they're not significantly more expensive. They're not anything new. I think it's an easy choice.
I think you're spot on. Well said. All right, a couple more quick questions, and then I'm going to kick it over to Mike because I think he's got some audience questions. Rob, what's one quote best practice in housing that you think deserves to be challenged, kicked out, done away with, off with its head?
Yeah, I don't know.
Price per square foot. How about that?
Well, hey, that's a
We'll come back to you.
my brain I'm stuck in building science mode based on Megan's, comments there. So yeah, I was thinking about some building products that we've used, over the years to try to tighten the envelope that, I think it may actually have negative impacts on indoor air quality and, wellness. So I don't know that I want to, call any of those out now in this forum, but that's kind of where my head was going.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, maybe how about if I can just paraphrase what I think you're thinking, maybe just making homes too tight so that they ultimately have a negative impact on health. Fair enough. Is that?
Yeah. So in other words, there's trade-offs. It's okay to tighten the envelope as long as you're thinking about indoor air quality and introducing outdoor air or fresh air, through mechanical.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Brandon, what hill are you willing to die on that most builders would disagree with?
Yeah, I've thought about this question a lot of just thinking where's my non-negotiables and even after the storm, where's my non-negotiables? And I think we're 19 years going on 20 years in business. And the one that we changed 13 years ago was every house we get is got a green certification of some sort. I do that because I firmly believe that there's value in that certification and the third party inspections. Right? It's amazing how many times we find that maybe an ERV got hooked up in the reverse way. It's things of that nature. It does give credibility to us and give validation to the homeowner. I think there's a lot of builders. I'm just going to should say this. There's a lot of builders in my area that are green builders, and I could have air quoted that, but it's pick off the shelf stuff, and the validation is there. So I can sit here on the screen and say, yeah, that's what we do, and I've got someone that's proved it. It's not a code built house that's just got some added features. That is a high performance house. And so yeah, I think that's probably the one I would die on, or I have died on it a few times.
Mm-hmm. And Megan, why do you think modern culture, not just in housing, but just in general, why do you think modern culture struggles to build things meant to last?
I mean, we have a real verifiable housing shortage. Like, we're all trying to get people housed as quickly as possible. And, um, if we're not careful, we do that quickly and it's not thoughtful enough. So I think that that's a struggle. I think there are a lot of different aspects that go into home building that um, can make it harder to focus on those specific things when you've got people in your ear wanting this now, wanting it for cheaper, wanting it, you know, just in a certain way. So I just think there's a lot of competing priorities and sometimes things get lost along the way. I think that, I don't speak for everybody, but I don't think it's just us sustainable builders or green builders that care about our customers. I think we all really want to build a good home. We all try really hard. Um, and competing priorities make things difficult.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, I've got just a few last questions and then I'm going to kick it over to Mike because he's got some audience questions and then he'll do a wrap up. Rob, complete this sentence. The future of housing depends on our willingness to.
Is to adapt and embrace technology such as industrialized offsite construction.
Gotcha. Okay, Megan, how would you complete that sentence?
Gosh, that was kind of what I was going to say. I was going to say, not just do things because we've done them the same way for 40 years. Let's innovate and be open to change. So yeah, similar.
Yeah. And Brandon, how about you?
Not sure how to put it in a sentence, but I think I get to Rob's first point. We got to be allowed to build houses, and not seen as a negative industry that's all about profits. And I think the panel here and the group on this is not, the end result will be hopefully profitability, right? But it's not our why statement. But and maybe we just need to change the stigma of home building and get us to where we're a noble industry again.
Nice. All right. And then just very quickly for each of you, 50 years from now, when people look back at this moment in history, what do you hope they say that we got right? Megan?
I think they're going to see this as an inflection point. I think that there has been a little, a lull, and people feel like, oh, how are we going to push sustainability forward? I think this is an opportunity for us to start from here and just continue to move upwards and onwards, as you say, up and to the right. I think we'll see that.
Thank you. And Brandon?
I'm thinking when I think about housing, what we got from COVID, right? We got a rising cost of construction. People got equity in their house, but we're seeing right now a point where we need to figure out housing cost to build the houses and put the people in the homes and then afford it. I would love for people to think in 50 years, we got it right. We figured it out and we put us on the right course for people to have housing.
Indeed. And Rob, how about you?
Yeah, I guess I think hopefully that we recognize the problems in the housing industry and we work together to address them and ensure that the future generations could realize the dream of homeownership.
Thank you. Mike, if you can pop back on and ask your final questions and do a wrap up for us and call it a day. I'm out for now. So Brandon, Rob, Megan, thank you, and really appreciate you being here. And thanks for being part of the reckoning.
All right. These questions are just for the panel. Hello, everyone. And so feel free to jump in. Cameron wants to know what's one lesson learned from a past project that resulted in a permanent change to your building practices?
I think I will take this just because I think it's when I first started building, my understanding of the customer experience, but building practice, I wasn't spending as much time fully focused on my foundations, making them watertight in the type of foundations I would use. I no longer use a block foundation here. We're in a temperate rainforest. We mostly never have crawl spaces, so basements. The steps that I take to get that right, I'm happy to slow down and add the cost. That is not a place where I cut cost because it really isn't a place that should ever be a cost savings area.
Got one. I'm not generally an all or nothing person. I'm a scientist, but I will say that going forward for us at Beezer, we are either, I mean, we are all ducts and condition space, but it's either ducts and condition space or not. We don't do buried ducts. I think that at scale, buried ducts is too prone to either miscalculations from your load calcs and issues that come from that. Poor installation because we're doing, a bunch of homes at a time and we don't get them fully covered and that leads to customer complaints or, homeowners that aren't educated enough go up and mess with it and they're not buried anymore. So we don't do buried ducts.
Rob, any lessons learned from a past project that you incorporate into a change?
Yeah, I mean, my mind went to, sort of the developer side of the industry more so than, the builder side. But I don't plan on buying any more property that's adjacent to the road. That's a long story that's going to require future, but yeah, just take my word for it.
All right. Melinda checked in from Canada. Thank you for joining us. She wanted to know what tools do you find help communicate the total cost of home ownership effectively? Have you found any tools that you utilize? Rob, I see you kind of shaking your head yes.
Well, I mean, I think that's where I kind of rely on my HERS rater as, a valued partner in, trying to communicate the value of what we're doing. That's, better, from just the stuff homes. So, kind of similar to what Brandon was saying earlier about, leaning on third party, verification or, diagnostics to help tell that story. And, they also do a lot of energy modeling for us. And, so some of that modeled performance, but, we're also starting to track energy bills and other metrics on the homes as they're living there to the extent that that will allow us to do that, and try to prove some of that out over time.
Okay. Megan?
Yeah, I agree with Rob. We lean heavily on our raters to help us with that data. We put together like, you know, we're not going to tell our raters what to do, of course, because we want them to be third party independent, but we do make sure that they're aware of the different things that we're doing, so we're getting the appropriate cost savings numbers. I think though that that's the easiest part for us. I think the real big lift is making sure that our salespeople can talk about it in an organic way and not just like when they walk in the door, you can save $200. Like, nobody likes that. So it's about messaging for sure.
Okay. Brandon, anything to add, or do you want to take the next one?
I'll do the next one.
All right. Alex wants to know, have you had any of your competitors change their building practices because of the example that you've set? And if so, what was that change?
You know, I would be excited if competitors did do that, right? I think that every one of us do want to inspire other builders and raise the bar as our industry. So, I don't know if I have a specific example. I'm very blessed where I live. There is a lot of high performance builders here. Will look at what other people are doing and take some ideas there as myself. So I don't know if I have any specific example outside of my job site sign that everyone in this town ripped off and now I'm changing it, but it was the greatest sign ever and it could capture the mountain views. But long story short, yeah, I served as my local HBA president, served as this North Carolina state president, and would hope that doing things like this and talking about what we're doing, I don't think we've ever tried to keep a trade secret. So I that would be cool if people did do that, right? I'd hope that I'd inspired some people.
Okay.
Yeah, same. I was just gonna say kind of the same thing. I mean, when I go to our divisions, they're usually peeking over at the competitors to see what they're doing in terms of marketing and pricing and stuff like that. I wouldn't be surprised if they were doing the same to us and seeing what we were doing, but I don't think anybody would admit that to me from another builder. We're a little competitive.
All right. Rob, you want to take this one or you want to take the next one?
I mean, I'll just add that, I feel like I stand on the shoulders of giants. I've learned from, a lot of really smart builders throughout my career. So, I'm sort of emulating what they're doing. I don't feel like I'm, copying and pasting. I'm always tweaking and, evolving what I'm doing as a result. But yeah, I like Brandon's approach there. I want to sort of pay it forward, and help the next generation of builders, learn from my mistakes, and hopefully just continue to do it better.
Okay. I got one for Brandon, specifically from Cindy. When you're positioning wellness, so she has some research that shows that positioning as a luxury item is more effective than focus on illness prevention. But what's resonating with your customers when you're marketing the wellness?
Here's what I would think that, and so for everybody to know, I am a luxury home builder, so that is my market. What I think is resonating with people is putting, and we've created 8 pillars, and it's putting all those pieces together and talking about it as opposed to like, I think a lot of us, definitely in the luxury market, think it's, oh, it's a sauna, it's this and that. And that's a piece of it for me, but it's a lot more stuff. And our first pillar is the front porch and a connection to your community. And, I can get on my 2-minute soapbox about why that matters. But did we just start walking through that? What I have found is pushback when I did high performance. So the people I build saving, some money on their power bill didn't always move the needle for them. Where it really moves the needle is they're worried about, they're thinking about their how healthy they are. They're really thinking about their wellness, and they're spending a lot of money to look good, be good and all that. And so when I start talking to people, have you ever considered, that could increase the quality of sleep you got? And most people don't say no to that. Have you thought about us being able to grow food right here in your kitchen and doing that where you know where your food came from and it's in your house and it's not out in the environment? Oh yeah, I'm curious about that. I like to make people curious and then open them up to ideas they never thought about. And I think someone said it earlier, but I always use the Henry Ford. If you'd asked his people, he wanted faster horses and wagons. Didn't know what they needed, right? So that's what Megan was saying, that these people don't know what they should be asking for. Position wellness in the right way, not a buzzword or a um a fad. It's truly like, no, this is a system we're putting in the house. I've found that that's really resonated, but I need just 10 seconds of curiosity, just small little things to plug in, and then they'll open the door to let you really talk about it.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we are going to call it a day here at the Sustainability Symposium. I want to thank all of our panelists for all the questions that they were able to get to, and I apologize for the ones that we weren't able to get to. But thank you very much for the time and the insight and the candor and the honesty, because it just helps all of us, as we talked about on the paying it forward and sharing good ideas. So that does conclude day one of the 2026 Sustainability Symposium, Systems Reckoning. I want to thank, obviously, all of our speakers, not just our panelists here, but all of our speakers today, as well as our audience, for being a part of day one. And again, thank you to Train Technologies, James Hardy, TimberTech, Provia, and IAPMO for helping to make all of this happen. Now, please make sure to join us tomorrow, again, starting at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for day two. Our featured speakers will be Andrew Winston, Lena Hansen, Tom Hoven, and Neil Collins. And make sure to use the same link that you used today to access tomorrow's event. You probably received already a reminder from Zoom so that you can come on back and have more fun with us. On behalf of Green Builder Media, I'm Mike Collignan. Thank you for attending today. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Take care, everyone.